Hey everyone, I'm excited to announce I have teamed up with First Form Nutrition. Andy Frisella, the owner, reached out to me during Hurricane Helene when I was in North Carolina and offered his assistance and to bring awareness. And now I am teamed up with them on their supplements. And there's some really good stuff like this peanut butter and jelly protein bar. This is a favorite of mine. These meat sticks, I like these because I can throw this in my backpack when I'm going out and doing missions or just in my truck. Protein powders are amazing, like this one, the clear. You can just throw it in your water bottle, shake it up, it's good to go. But what I really like about First Form Nutrition is the clean ingredients. It's not full of a bunch of junk, not a bunch of artificial stuff, soy free. Protein powders are clean, the energy drinks are clean, really good nutrition stuff, creatines, all kinds of good stuff out there. So go check it out. We're going to have a link for you below and appreciate the support. I want to show you my new favorite supplement. It is magnesium, zinc, and vitamin C all in one. These ingredients are very, very clean. It's in a glass jar too. It's not a plastic bottle. I've been using this for about 3 weeks now, and I really like it. I do it about 3 times a day, but this is going to be going with me on missions when I go travel. That way I can stay healthy, avoid all the colds and flus and all the nasty things going on in airplanes and airports. But check it out. I got two codes for you. I got Thick 30A Broker and Howard 20. You'll save 20% on your next purchase. Thank you.
After growing up in San Antonio, Texas, the son of both the mother and father who served in the Air Force, I immediately enlisted in the Air Force upon completion of high school, where I served 22 years within special operations and really realized that my passion was for taking care of others. Throughout my military career, I had the opportunity to move several times, and I realized that navigating the real estate market can be difficult at times. As I'm soon to retire, I plan to transition the skills I've learned as a leader within the military and ultimately taking care of others to take care of others as they navigate the real estate market. I have firsthand experience of how daunting a task it can be, especially if you're buying your first home while serving in the military. And I look to take the skills that I've developed from negotiating with terrorist organizations to negotiate with buyers, sellers, and ultimately represent my clients. A unique feature of the small team that I work alongside here in Florida is we really strive to take the attributes and characteristics of a special operations team and use that diplomacy and appropriate level of aggressiveness to represent our clients. Throughout my life, whether it was boxing, participating in mixed martial arts, or playing football, I realized that I had a knack for really taking care of others and leading high-performing teams. I transitioned that directly into my time in the service as both an enlisted operator and a special operations leader for over 22 years. Although I'm soon to retire from the service, I'm still very focused on taking care of service members, particularly because I'm still married to an active duty service member myself.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the John Howard Show. It's the first time we have done this since July of 24. And I got my first guest, my buddy Jimmy Cleckler here. Really, thank you for agreeing to come on the show.
Yeah.
You got an amazing story. I've known you for, I think, 12, 13 years, something like that when I met you in the combat control pipeline. And then now I got you doing some real estate with me since you're about to retire here in, I think, like a month, couple weeks.
Mm. 2 weeks.
But I want to give an introduction who Jimmy is. Jimmy, born and raised in Texas, I believe, West Texas boy, San Antonio, and then joined the Air Force as a SEER specialist. Actually went up to the tier one level as a SEER specialist. We'll really want to get into that because I don't know much about it. Then crossed over to be a combat controller as an officer. I don't know how many deployments you've done, but I know you got a couple of Bronze Stars, you got a Purple Heart, and is it 20 years of service that you're at?
22.
22 years of service, and now you're going into real estate, and I think you're probably going to come join over at the SMU with us over here in Florida as
Yep.
well, which is exciting just because the amount of experience you bring over. Um, got an amazing wife. She's also active duty, does a lot of cool stuff. And I think that's about all I know really about you. Other than I just, every time I will say this about you, there's very few people that get my attention when it comes to talking. I usually find maybe it's because I'm a Gemini, but I usually find people very boring. And I usually try to find a way to like get away from that person because I'm just the conversation is very dull and boring for me. And ever since I met you, every time you start talking, it's one of the few times I actually shut up and I just start listening because I'm actually like very just like this is interesting to me. Like I've never heard these kind of conversations, and you have really amazing stories, which I think is perfect for what the audience here likes. But Why don't you go ahead and correct me, give yourself an introduction, and let me know if there's anything I said incorrect there, and let's hear it. Let's hear the Jimmy.
No, I think probably 90% accurate on the introduction itself. I am from San Antonio. Both my parents were in the Air Force. They were out before I was born. I have four older sisters, so I was kind of raised mostly by my mom and dad, obviously, but my oldest sister was pretty key. My oldest and closest sister were pretty key in my development. Um, yeah, San Antonio, pretty easy to join the Air Force out of there. I originally wanted to join the Navy. My parents were pretty much, it was Air Force or nothing. Um, did pretty well in school, swam, raced bikes, skated, played football, boxed. Pretty active kid. Didn't really care for academics, although I did as well as I needed to. It just never, it never really enlightened me or excited me to learn some of the things I was being taught. So I knew the military was a path, unless I was going to go on to play sports. Um, the only probably thing that I'd say was in it a bit inaccurate. I actually came in the Air Force on a pararescue contract. Went to a recruiter. Shout out, her name was Lana Engel. I still remember her. Uh, I don't think in any way she lied to me. I fear, and if we hit on it later on, I can explain why I have this thought of it. But um, I went in with kind of that same thing. I was 17. Hey, I swim, I do this, I box, I played football. I want to do special operations, but I have to join the Air Force. And I just think she was misinformed, as a lot of folks still are. 22, 23 years later, uh, when she heard my background and that I want to do special operations, she's like, "Oh, pararescue, got to do it." And it took about 2, 3 weeks into boot camp. If you, as you probably remember, when all the different kind of critically manned Air Force specialty codes come around and they give their recruiting pitch, and it's the actual the folks from those different communities. So, a guy named Kirby Rodriguez, who's still one of my dear friends, and Greg Herricks came around and briefed combat control, and immediately I was like, hey, that's what I want to do. Like, these guys are, the way I generally categorize it's a very offensive organization. Hey, like, see a problem, plan, go fix a problem. Uh, Whether that's with the Army, with the Navy, with the Marine Corps, whomever back then. Um, so I was like, immediately I wanted to become a combat controller at boot camp. Um, However, with pararescue being critically manned and combat control being critically manned, they were unable to let me swap. Right. So finished boot camp, went to PJ and Doc, and that's where I met another guy who was terribly impactful in my life, named Dave Keaton, retired as a PJ chief. Um, he was my proctor, right? So I'm an 18-year-old kid, no real life experience besides high school and sports, um, and I'm begging, how do I become a combat controller? Rob Gutierrez was actually a class or two ahead of mine, and he had a similar pathway. Um, Long story short, there just really wasn't a path. So I was like, all right, keep my head down. Uh, I was probably I was not a big runner, as you can imagine. I would run as I needed to for certain things, but um, the in the water I was terribly comfortable, but when it came to distance runs, there's no way I was going to pass. So kept trying, got set back, kept trying. Kind of similar how you and I have talked off camera. I was kind of the middleman for the cadre or the instructors of, hey, we got a new class coming. You've been here. Get them off the bus, get them in the barracks or the dorms, um, get them ready for NDOC. But after a couple rounds of that, and me, I was probably 230 pounds back then. So when you're talking, run a 6 mile and 7 minute pace, 42 minutes, there was no chance of me making it. So I kept chirping to the commandant back then, and to the instructors, hey, how do I go to combat control? Albeit there was still a requirement back then for that run, but it was later in the pipeline. So I knew I'd have time to actually cut some weight and focus on running. Either way, it wouldn't happen. So I walked in, and I told Dave Keaton, like, hey, this isn't working. I joined the service to leave San Antonio, and I've been in San Antonio for like 6 months post boot camp now. I want to do something else. So yeah, he said, hey, talk to it was a guy last name Winder, either Brian or Brad Winder. I think it was Brian. Either way, but talk to the commandant, and hard no on letting me go to combat control. Understandably, they didn't want to set the precedent that if you weren't able to make it to NDOC, you can make it through combat control, because combat control had just recently separated from all going through NDOC. which I understand now from a managerial perspective. But I said, okay, then I'll be a TAC P, right? As you know, like, hey, it's the closest thing I can. I've seen plenty of guys do that, and they go become TAC Ps. And Dave Keaton, Staff Sergeant Keaton at the time, it's like, no, you're going to be a SEER specialist. Um, he knew more about that community well more than I did. Back then, there were SEER instructors, but he saw that as a pathway for me to go do that for a little bit, and then likely make my way back into kind of the what we in the Air Force call the guardian angel community or the combat search and rescue community. Um, and again, I grew up in San Antonio. I was a city kid. I'd probably never seen a paper map, never camped, wasn't a hunter. Like I grew up in the city, and all I'd ever seen was the SEER guys. They were like kind of a weird offshoot, but I really just trusted Dave Keaton, which I absolutely appreciate his guidance. Went on to do SEER. That was 2003 and 2004. Learned a ton. I'd never seen snow in my life. Uh, Again, never really spent a lot of time outside. So went through the SEER pipeline, did pretty well. Uh, Deployed essentially right after. This is when they were first starting to push SEER guys out, and I had done well in the pipeline, and a lot of the kind of senior cadre liked me, I guess. So pretty quickly, the traditional path is you would stay up there and you would teach essentially the survival school that all of us have gone through. So I think I went out twice and like shadowed a senior instructor, and then trained for deployment and deployed to Iraq uh, in 2005. So pretty quick deployment. Um, During that time, I was assigned to Siege of SOTF Iraq, right? So Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force Iraq, essentially as a personal recovery planner. So providing updates, moving aircraft around, positioning them to decrease times of response for primarily the theater soft, white soft guys that were out, doing, primarily unconventional warfare type stuff, primarily Green Berets and some SEAL platoons. So I got to see kind of the outskirts of where I knew I wanted to go, and then I really started trying to fast track whatever that pathway looked like to get there. So um, immediately while I was deployed, I think I made senior airman on that deployment or right before that deployment, so I could put in a retraining package. So I put in a package for combat control. Again, this is before we had computers in the team rooms and nobody knew half the stuff about the internet. I think it was.
Hey everybody, I love doing this show, but it does cost money. If you can help us by going to our links and buying the products that we are showcasing, it'll help us to continue doing this show. It'll also help us to continue working with future charities and helping people in times of need during disasters. The links are below. Thank you. Real quick,
Yeah.
you were doing that as an E3.
Yeah, I think I went out the doors in E3 and made E4, or maybe right before I left. I
That's
was a brand new E4.
that's a lot as an E3. Like that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what was funny too is I worked really closely with some battalion reconnaissance Marines who were pretty heavily involved in Fallujah the second go round. Um, and when they heard SEER guys coming, again, these are conventional infantry Marines in an amazing formation to work with. But when they heard, hey, a SEER guy's coming, in their brain, SEER equaled special operations. So I show up. I was an E4 then, and it was a Marine '06. Great guys. Last name Jay Stone was his name, and he's kind of important in the back end of this. But I get on a helicopter. I fly to the Iraqi Camp Fallujah, which wasn't far from main Camp Fallujah, and the mission there was to uh, assess, recruit, train, and equip what they were trying to build into the next Iraqi Special Operations Formation. So a pretty hefty mission for some conventional, battalion reconnaissance Marines, but super motivated guys, real small, tight knit crew, and then a ton of Iraqis. So I got to do some cool stuff as a SEER guy for that. Teaching these folks land nav, how to work radios, how to work MBGs, some of the basic kind of shoot, move, and communicate skills. But it was great. The Marines all viewed me as probably more capable than I really was as an E4 back then. But they took amazing care of me. I couldn't thank those guys enough for. I mean, it was a hectic time to be in just outside Fallujah, um, but learned a ton. So dial up internet, put in a retraining package, combat control before I even got back. Came back and yeah, pretty quickly thereafter, I got orders down to San Antonio to be a selection instructor for the SEER specialist selection course. Pardon that alliteration there, but um, which was weird because I was still an E4. But the way back then the advertisement or the recruitment was, they were looking for instructors that had been to jump school, had some deployment time, and they ran the ad as an E4. So I was kind of a unicorn in that in that situation. So by then I'd been out of San Antonio for a few years. I was ready to go back. Like my family was there. So I volunteered, which was funny. Didn't think there was any chance. Again, I'm still learning the internet at this point, so I like click a button. Don't think it really even goes anywhere. And then our squadron chief comes in one day, pretty upset because he didn't know how the internet worked either. And I think I was the first guy that got orders without him like personally being involved. So he's like, "Well, you got ordered San Antonio. I don't know how this worked, but everybody else stay away from the computers. Don't go on the computer without telling me." So obviously we've changed in the past couple decades, but yeah, I went down to San Antonio. I loved it. I was just a probably third in charge, fourth in charge as a SEER instructor. Everybody else was much more senior to me. Made staff, made E5 pretty quick, so kind of moved my way up a bit. And then our E6 actually broke his back on a static line parachuting jump. So because I had uh, been working on my degree and also working on becoming a instructor supervisor in kind of the air education training command side of the house, I got to fill in as the instructor supervisor for that course specifically, which was great. I mean, I learned a ton. Um, and then pretty near that, again, still trying to retrain into combat control. So right down the hill across the track was the combat control selection course. We worked very closely. We're all in the same unit. So pararescue, NDOC, combat control selection or orientation course, and then SEER selection. Um, Combat control experienced a fatality in training about that time, and it started to, the focus became really close on a lot of the instructor side of the house, which coming from the SEER background, we focused on pretty heavily. So the squadron commander at the time made me the instructor supervisor for the courses down there. So uh, I was in a unique predicament of, I was also a curriculum writer. So hey, how do we change the curriculum for these courses to make them safer? Which they're about as safe as they're going to be. It's just some activities are inherently dangerous, and some aren't. And um, but again, even back then, I would say the course was about as well run as it needed to be. If the goal is to still try to find the right people, the right fit for the communities. Yeah, but so a weird predicament because I'm the instructor supervisor for the combat control selection course while trying to get approved to retrain into combat control and go through the same course that I wrote the curriculum for, which I ended up doing down the road. Um, but again, that just fueled my fire to want to become a combat controller. Again, the career field manager, kind of the senior chief of the community for SEER was absolutely against really anybody, but he was keeping a really tight lever on who he was letting go. So this is the same time, Marty Betelgeuse, prior SEER, Timmy Davis, prior SEER. Those are the two that really stick out. Had both gone on to become combat controllers, and then later, unfortunately, killed in action and killed in training. So I knew there was a pathway to go, but it just wasn't available to me at the time. So um, actually, that Marine '06, I said he was kind of critical to the story previously. Uh, he had then moved on to a kind of quasi interagency position in DC, and was nice enough or appreciative enough of our time together. Um, Kind of threw my name in the hat for a position in North Carolina at the Joint Special Operations Command. So uh, again, we were joking about Sam Schindler, Lieutenant Colonel retired. He's got a kind of a critical role in the next couple months, but he was a prior enlisted combat controller. Now I think he was a lieutenant or maybe a captain working down in San Antonio, and huge mentor of mine. I could go to him for a lot of things. And he gets a call initially of, hey, Staff Sergeant Cleckler has been invited to this assessment, and it's a terribly generic email, from what nowadays would be like a Proton Mail account, but it was just this really generic email of, hey, we're going to run an assessment. Show up at this, DoubleTree Hotel in San Antonio, which was nice because it was right up the road. No military attire, suit and tie, and prepare for some physical stuff, very very vague, and a lot of screening, IQ test, um, stuff like that. So I was excited, didn't know what it was. They actually called and did a phone interview before that, and I was in Captain Schindler's office, or yeah, back then Captain Schindler's office. And again, they're terribly generic. Hey, are you interested in a special operations assignment in the southwest portion of the United States? And I was pretty witty and interested, but they said they couldn't tell me a whole lot more than that. And I was under the impression it was with ASOC, right? I had no idea. So when they asked if I was interested in an assignment to the southeast portion of the United States, but they couldn't tell me, I just said, "Well, does it rhyme with Furlbert?" And they're like, "No, it does not rhyme with Furlbert." Uh, but Sam, I remember Sam was dying laughing. Like, good try. So anyway, I go to the assessment. They don't tell you anything. Do all kind of stuff. They say, hey, if we knock on your door in the middle of the night, it means you're gone. Don't ask any questions. Pack your stuff and leave. I think there was probably 30, 40 folks there from all over. I just happened to be lucky that it was in San Antonio. Anyway, I get through the whole week. Uh, kind of finally at the end, they give you a nod essentially of you're going to get orders to North Carolina. I'm like, okay. First time I really figured out it's North Carolina. So um, did that again throughout this whole thing. I still have a request in to retrain into combat control, but I'm getting told hard no. So
Yeah, what year was this?
this would have been 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Um, so I move up North Carolina, training, the initial training. I leave my family in San Antonio because it's not a guarantee that you're going to make it through the training course. So training course took about 7, 8 months. And then after completion of that, I'm going to be living in North Carolina. So family moves up there then. Um, yeah. And then while I'm there, I'm working on my degree. I'm trying to, just do whatever I can. It's a pretty busy. That's when I really got in the hook. So the organization I was assigned to was, you know, uh, in the Air Force parlance, it's a data master organization, right? So nothing says kind of where you're at, what you're doing, why you're doing it. Your reports are all pretty generic. The kind of the going rate is like, hey, if the guy has a report from this organization, he's doing really well, but we're not going to put a lot on it because if he wasn't doing really well, he or she, if they weren't doing really well, they wouldn't be here. And we're not going to tell you on an unclassified back then enlisted performance report. We can't tell you what they're doing, but the fact that they have kind of this passcode or this identifier, they're they're about as high up as they can get as performance based organizations go. Um, so promoted to E6 first time. Spent a couple years up there. The bulk of my time up there was deployed, primarily Afghanistan. All things, Bo Bergdahl, and we chatted about it off camera
Mhm.
a bit, but uh, you know, I was really focused on clandestine personal recovery, right? And in that wheelhouse, in that time frame, 2008, 9, 10, it was a Bo Bergdahl, right? He was kind of the primary objective of an organization that ended up turning into a pretty large organization focused on recovering American folks held abroad.
And
Um,
and just real quick, so I guess for just people aren't tracking, you're now up at North Carolina, the tier one level
yep,
with the National Mission Force.
yep.
And you kind of hit on it earlier, but you talked about white side. Can you explain those differences, like from what you were doing then to what you're doing kind of now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So all of the special operations components essentially have a theater formation and then a national uh, formation
Mm.
or national mission. The theater mission is what most folks hear about all the time, or what at least back then we called white soft being theater, black soft being the national level. But yeah, the theater formation does great work. That's where you get a lot of Green Berets that are out doing unconventional warfare, building partnerships. Some would say winning hearts and minds. Some wouldn't, but kind of like if you were to Google what does a Green Beret do, the mission statement you're going to find is essentially what the theater side is doing. Not to say that the national level can't do those things, but they're kind of more of the scalpel uh, to do some other things. And that's the same for the theater SEAL platoons, the theater special tactics squadrons, and MARSOC. On the national side, any of those formations, and in some of the national mission units, anybody from the branch can come assess. So on the national side, you have those skills. You have some older, more mature folks that are generally tasked to do uh, more politically sensitive or riskier operations. So 100% assessed and selected organization in the national force, right? Which which I loved. And I didn't realize how lucky I was to be in that organization, but
Were you
you
the
know,
only SEER guy?
I was, yeah. Yeah, for the role I filled, I was the first, and I think the last SEER guy to have done it. But in the Air Force eyes, I essentially lost my specialty code. I didn't wear a uniform. If there was a funeral or a ceremony, I could wear it, I guess. But I wasn't doing the traditional role of an Air Force SEER specialist by any means, um, which I think really broadened my horizons and taught me a ton. Because pardon me, on the Bo Bergdahl side of the house specifically, we were rotating through with the Army'd have a plan, the Navy'd have a plan at the national level, um, and my responsibility was to assess that plan, brief back anything to pretty often to the task force commander of the risks associated with it, how feasible is it, um, really kind of not to dissect another tier's plan, but to just make sure like, hey, this is kind of the political sensitivities we're involving, knowing that where Bo Bergdahl was held was a pretty volatile area, and a theater soft formation was never going to be able to go execute that operation. And also at the kind of the joint interagency level, balancing, hey, when does this go from a Department of Defense mission to state or to another arm of our ecosystem in the U.S. government to ultimately recover this soldier that's being held in Pakistan, right, not Afghanistan. So there was a lot. I mean, I learned a ton of, as much as I hated it, how to staff things, how to what authorities versus permissions actually are. Because you might have authorities to do all kind of stuff, but you need permission still to do it. Which, if we talk about aspect war at all, that's an important kind of underpinning to that. But yeah, so I was doing that. I was going to school. I got my degree online. I jokingly tell people I studied abroad, but I know you brought up extortion, but right after I was deployed for about 8 months straight, it was supposed to be 6, and then extortion happened, and I ended up staying a bit longer. That pivoted the entirety of the task force
Yeah.
for some of that. But
And for people, extortion 1-7, that was like at the time the greatest loss of life in the
yeah,
special operations community.
yeah, um, yeah, that was August 5th/6th, 2011. Um, a whole troop of Gold Squadron Navy guys, 3 special tactics guys from the 2-4 STS, 7 Afghans, and one more individual and a dog, and the aircrew. So 38 folks total, if I did that math correctly. Um,
Wow.
but
I
yeah,
didn't realize that was Gold Squadron.
hmm
I didn't realize that
yep.
because I just talked about
Adam
Adam.
Brown, yeah, I
Yeah,
heard that. Yeah, yeah, it was
I didn't realize that was the same unit.
post Adam, but yeah, Gold Squadron. Jonas Kelsall was a troop commander.
Mm.
A lot of experience, a lot of talented guys. Um, but so when that happened, I actually ended up staying 2.5 months longer than I should have. Again, I was enjoying it, the work itself, but uh, you know that was horrible. And again, I heard some of the other podcasts chatting through it with Aaron Vaughn and his dad, and terribly accurate. I think horrible situation. Um, but they really kind of, I think that they did a good job talking through some of the details that I think a lot of the the greater nation may not be aware of just all the compounding effects that led to ultimately a kind of a catastrophic event. Um,
That was on Anti-Hero, right?
Anti-hero
Yeah,
podcast,
I,
yeah,
I need to go check that out because I'm real curious on that one. Just because I mean
yeah,
that was unfortunately a very big day in history for
yeah. It
all
was
of us.
horrible. I mean, it
Yeah.
was horrible, and I mean, I remember hearing it, seeing it live. And then the back end of it was, you know, you, the task force commander gave very clear intent, and I think the formation executed as about as with what they could do at the time, executed the recovery efforts relatively well. I mean, again, they talk about it in the Anti-Hero podcast, but I mean, it was like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. You have stuff, you have casualties and equipment strewn about, right? Because when a helicopter is hit by an RPG at that altitude, I think a lot of people think it just lands all together, but you have motors over here, some folks that were ejected over here, not to mention a burning 47, which burns for a long time, um, and a random rainstorm that's causing a flood. And now you have stuff on the desert floor that you're trying to first off maintain security and then also recover all this stuff. But then how do you prioritize what you're recovering when certain things are in certain terrain that could get washed away? I mean, it was pretty. It was a kind of a nightmarish situation. Um, but yeah, so that kept me in theater a couple more months, which silver lining wise, I was personally I was going to school as much as I could online. Um, After that, we had a pretty significant combat pause for the task force, so everything kind of slowed down. Obviously, everybody recovered back to the main base there in Afghanistan for ramp ceremonies and all that. Which again, on the one Antihero podcast, they talk about some uh, very interesting, very accurate, but interesting parts to how that thing went down. Um, but so I got delayed. Yet there was a combat pause. So the Navy guys I was with, they hung up a poncho. They put a sign up that just said Ashford University Annex, Afghanistan Annex. Because I was just sitting there. I was on this laptop, 20 hours a day. Everybody who knows me knows I don't sleep a whole lot. So I was able to finish. I knocked my degree, max perform my tuitions assistance to get it done because also kind of ongoing at this point. I'm an E5, very likely to make or no, I'm an E6, very likely to make E7 the first go around. So the SEER community is really wants to pull me back to Fairchild, but personally and probably quasi selfishly, I acknowledged I had never really done that job. So I get it from a managerial perspective of, hey, we have this guy that's kind of out on the fringes. Let's bring him back so he can mentor the younger guys. And my retort was like, hey, I can't mentor the younger guys because one, I've never done what they've done, and two, I can't tell them anything I've been doing uh, for this pretty significant period of time in North Carolina. Um, so I got my degree and I submitted a package while in Afghanistan still to come to Special Tactics Officer selection. And the One Ready podcast had me delve into that a little bit of, hey, why did you want to go Special Tactics versus Combat Rescue Officer? Um, and I was seeing it, even at the National Mission Force level, we'd bring out combat rescue officers. A lot of them were attachments or guys that weren't they hadn't been through the whole course. They're coming from the theater side to the national side of like an augmentee. And, these are very talented, smart guys. Of captains, majors, but I mean they're updating slides and an important job. Making sure that the right assets are at mission support sites for a raid or a hit. But it just wasn't appealing to me whatsoever. I wanted to, since that brief and basic training, years prior, I wanted to be part of an offensive organization that went out and executed mission. I didn't want to be waiting. The guardian angel kind of pararescue, combat rescue officer community writ large is designed as a reactive formation, right? It's like, hey, we're going to be here, we're ready, we have impeccable training and very talented people, and when something happens, you let us know, we'll go. They're kind of like the firemen. I joke that when young folks ask, especially young recruiters, it's like, hey, if you look at if a kid's interested in pararescue, like go out in the local populace. That's kind of like firemen, right? Like they're there, they're ready. The population loves them. When something goes wrong, they're well equipped. They show up and they generally do really cool stuff. That's kind of the closest analogy I could tie to the guardian angel CSAR pararescue side, right? And uh, TACPs are kind of like cops, right? There's a lot more of them. They're kind of all over. But if you see them, something's going on. Like there's something bad probably happened if they're out and they're busy. Um, and then the special tactics side, which is where I wanted to go, is kind of like the SWAT team, right? It's a combination of all those experienced formations, um, oriented on a smaller mission set, but generally a riskier and sometimes more high profile mission set. Um, I know that's not completely accurate, but if you're talking to a young kid, I think that's a helpful way of
I think that's a
explaining.
really I think that helps civilians understand that a little bit better. That's a good way to break it down.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be a kind of the closest thing that a random kid off the street would understand. It's like
Yeah.
PJ's kind of like fireman, TAC P's kind of like cop, special tactics, including combat control. That'd be the SWAT formation, right? Experienced, highly trained, but not used for everything, right? They're not a general purpose force for a reason. They're a special operations force, which again is why the new Air Force moniker of Air Force Special Warfare is terribly confusing, because it kind of lumps that together and it adds in SEER and it adds in explosive ordnance disposal, which aren't in any way really tied together. You have You have the TAC-P formation, which exists to, really integrate the conventional Army into the air picture. You have the pararescue Crow CSAR community, which exists to really conduct personnel recovery, primarily combat search and rescue for the Air Force or the Joint Force, depending. And then you have special tactics, which includes combat control, special reconnaissance, and TAC-P and pararescue. But the only way to get into the the true core inherent soft organization as a young kid is you'd have to go combat control or special reconnaissance or the stow route, which I always tell people, hey man, enlist first, get some time, and then go that route. Not to say we don't have very talented guys coming straight into being a stow, but I think if you really want to apply your talents and test yourself, spend some time as a combat controller or a SR, special reconnaissance guy, and then if you have your degree, great. Then you can commission, and it really makes the pipeline look much different, as did mine. But you're going to get some more deployment out of it, and still get the same level of training, and you show up with the understanding of what the boys kind of are living, breathing, thinking daily, because you were that at some point, which which is a way I always kind of push people. I
I
know,
agree.
yeah. I mean,
I agree with that a lot. Like some of the best officers I knew prior enlisted. So I mean,
yeah. I mean, I joke it's an unfair advantage, and it
yeah.
absolutely is, but it's like, hey, you got to earn it that way. I mean, there's really not a better way to do it.
I mean, you understand what that E3's going through, E4.
Yeah.
You understand. I mean, you get a lot of ground time, a
Yep.
lot of team time. So
Yeah. I mean, you get a lot of team time. Plus, you've already accomplished the pipeline, the bulk of it. So, um, when it comes time, you're going to show up on a team as a second lieutenant, as I did, versus like a probably a brand new captain, right? So that equals more deployments because you're an assistant troop commander now. And then by the time you're a troop commander, you've got however many deployments you did as an enlisted guy, plus maybe one or two extra because you showed up as a lieutenant, and now you're a junior captain rank wise, but you're a pretty experienced guy who's been there, done that, and I think for I always joke, as a special tactics officer, it's really unique for the Air Force side of the house, because the Air Force is really built on equipment and capability. Air Force senior leaders talk in how many airplanes or how many radars or how many radios or whatever. Where as a special tactics officer, your job is really to talent manage, organize, train, equip, and employ a bunch of talented NCOs. Right? I don't have airplanes. I don't have, I don't force project guns or radios. I force project special tactics teams that have those things, right? But they have those things to meet mission. Um, so as kind of a psychology nerd, it was the best formation to go to, where you're surrounded by guys that no matter what, like I still mentor young officers to this day. Like, man, if you don't bring your A game to a special tactics team, you're done. Like, and that's every day. Um, and I was never the smartest guy in the room. Uh, Often, never the most experienced guy in the room, but having the trust and the understanding from your unbelievably talented NCOs on the team it's great. It makes it the best place you can ever be, right? You have the most motivated dudes that just want to work, and they have no problem advising you appropriately. We've talked about several guys that we've both crossed paths with, but terribly talented guys that really make you bring your A game every day, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be tested, and I wanted to fight, and I wanted to be part of an organization that tested me every single day. You hear the moniker all the time. You got to earn your beret every day, which I believe that, and I do think you do, because as you know, the guys will snip it out in about 30 seconds if you're coming off a trip, or you're trying to sneak out of a deployment, or you're prioritizing yourself over the needs of the formation or the team. Like, that's a pretty quick death as a special tactics officer, which I wanted, right?
yeah,
I wanted to be around that. I grew up that, whether it was playing football or boxing or swimming or whatever, I was always surrounded by guys that pushed me to be better. So, uh,
the team first, team eats first.
yeah, that's the whole point.
Yeah,
We say that most of the formation, I think, understands that, lives by it. Uh, you get some weirdness when you start trying to force in external cultures into our culture. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we do an amazing job. Some of my best friends and mentors were longtime Army guys, longtime Navy guys, and we would joke pretty often of the talent that special tactics attracts and retains is amazing, and we can be unbelievably selective, um, because we don't have to generate the same mass. There's there's thousands of SEALs, there's thousands of Green Berets. I'm not saying that ST is better at all, but we can afford to be pretty selective, because we're not being asked to provide 1,000 dudes or a group's worth of guys, or we at the largest we provide about a company, in joint parlance, we're deploying about a company's worth of guys at a time. So you can be pretty selective, um, which is good, right? And you can be pretty directive when it comes to getting somebody out of the formation for certain things. Um, so yeah, quality control is high.
Yeah.
Quality control is high. We have very talented folks.
Wait, how big is the CCT career field like right now?
It's around 500.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's still small.
including guard. Yeah, it's
Okay.
pretty small.
It was about 400, I think, when I was in, so it's still small. And then
Yeah,
how many stows, the officers out of 500?
um, and those numbers get kind of weird. I mean, we have a fair amount.
Probably not even 100.
It's probably right around 100,
Around 100,
right
yeah.
for the special tactics officer side of
Yeah.
the house. Now we do fill, like I mentioned, we fill gaps with TAC P officers and with combat rescue officers that choose to come into special tactics. And then depending on how they perform, we will retain them. There's some very talented pros at the National Mission Force level now, and TAC P officers. But if they don't perform well, we send them back to Air Combat Command, right? Which is kind of the Air Force ecosystem that owns them.
Hmm.
So it kind of allows us to keep a judge on that.
I
But
think that breaks it down more like earn your bray every day. Because
oh
when you
yeah,
realize how small, like if you just go to the stow side, 100 people, everyone's going to know everyone's business. They're going to know their reputation. So, I
oh
mean, you,
yeah,
you really are earning it every
you
day.
absolutely are. Yeah, I mean, and it's meticulously managed, and I don't say it to be self-serving, but I mean, for an organization, everybody wants special tactics. That we have the big Air Force is asking for it now, which is kind of a hard ask because we're paid for and essentially built by SOCOM, Special Operations Command. Um, but the last year, part of my portfolio was really managing uh, all the stows, right? So who was going where? Obviously, that was terribly. I was terribly informed by senior guys on how I managed it, but my actual position was managing it, right? So you have this insane spreadsheet that somebody much smarter than me designed of who's been where, what experiences do they have, kind of what gates have they met, um, and then all the things that you have to layer into that, right? Because a lot of times it seems like kind of a chess game. Hey, this guy goes here, this guy goes here. It's real easy, but then you factor in, well, hey, this guy has also a terribly talented wife that can only go here, and this guy has childcare concerns, so he can't go overseas. So uh, you manage that as best you can. But I mean, I we put a lot of time into uh, for both the special reconnaissance, combat control, and stow side. I mean, there is a lot of hours in a week that go to trying to put the guys specifically in the right places for the health and the betterment of the entire formation. Um, which again, we kind of, I wouldn't say we joked, but we discussed uh, the differences in Crow or Guardian Angel and special tactics. But special tactics, officer, combat control, and special reconnaissance, those are soft inherent formations, right? So the entirety of your career, you will be within the special operations umbrella, and you will work for a special operator, right? On the Crow PJ side, TAC P side, that's not true, right? You're probably going to bounce back and forth between Air Combat Command, which is predominantly an Air Force pilot-led organization, and then you can come in and out of special tactics depending. Um, there's a way to make that much cleaner, but I've talked about that ad nauseum. Um, but really, at the end of the day, for the soft inherent formation, I think on the previous podcast it sparked some kind of unnecessary debate, but um, in no way was I or was anybody saying that you know the guys that are in the special operations formation are tougher or better, right? It's a different mission, and the authorities that are passed down to the special operations component are for those politically sensitive, higher risk operations, um, and then those authorities and permissions are granted to the special operations formation to do certain things, both on the theater and the national side. So I jokingly said, hey, there's value in being in the special operations formation because you get the mission, you get the work. Like if you want to go, if you want to be that lever that the National Command Authority can pull to do certain things, you need to be within that soft umbrella. where the authorities and permissions lie to go do certain stuff. We have very talented folks on the ACC side, just like the Navy has rescue swimmers, which are very tough, highly trained folks. But then they have naval special warfare, right? Nobody's conflating that a rescue swimmer is a SEAL, right? They have similar training in some aspects. Um, and that's kind of the analogy I tie to the TAC-P, Guardian Angel, PJ community, and special tactics. It's like, hey, neither is better than the other, but due to the infrastructure and where they lie, they're going to do different things, right? If you work for the big air component, you're probably going to sit CSAR for when one of their airplanes and pilots go down to go recover them, because that's what they are tasked with and value, which I respect that. It's a righteous mission. But you're not going to be able to take that formation and say, hey, we can do the same thing this other formation can do legally, right, through Title 10. Um, so I mean, I kind of rope that in as the recruiting call out for folks. It's like, man, if you want to be in the Air Force and do special operations, there's one place you do it, and that's called special tactics. Um, and I know folks get emotional about it, but that's kind of where it is.
As my new friend Brent from Antihero said on when I was on the show, he said, everybody wants a seat on that helicopter. And the way you get the seat on the helicopter is you go to selection,
Yep. Yeah.
and then you get a seat on the helicopter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree. I heard that and I giggled.
Yeah.
I agree. I used to joke like, hey, everybody wants the Sunto watch
Yeah.
until it's time to go through selection.
Hmm.
Like that's
And
that's a
wait,
better analogy that Brent had. But
and the way you broke it down is right. It's just a different mission
yeah,
set. It's
yeah.
completely night and day different.
Yeah, and I mean, in kind of the moniker you hear at all the tier selections at the national level, it's like, man, we're not better, we're just different, right? You'll see guys that you think are unbelievably talented, and they're amazing, and they're a non-select.
Yeah.
And you'll see guys that you're like, I don't know, we'll give them a go, and then they're a select, and they spend the rest of their career up there doing great stuff. It's just a different organization with different mission.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I did giggle when I heard the conversation, because I mean, I think it's true. There's a lot of folks, and I fear on the Air Force side, you have a lot of folks that they've never delved into that world whatsoever, right? And they're like, oh, we have these guys that have guns and helmets and trucks and radios. Why can't they do kind of like what you guys do, but for us? And I mean, there's so many reasons why they couldn't, right? Presidential authority, Title 10, uh, the risks associated with it. We were talking about it offline. The TAC-P formation, terribly talented, right? Great guys. Uh, a lot of them probably came in to be combat controllers and PJs, and it didn't work out, uh, which is fine, right? Because they're still great Americans and patriots. Um, and they are used to being on the ground with the Army, with the conventional Army, right? So if you do kind of this thought experiment of, well, hey, if they're not going to be with the Army, we're just going to take them and have them do Air Force stuff, then on the very tactical level, I've kind of thrown the red flag and said, okay, so you have all these guys that are out. Okay, who owns the battle space, right? Because even at tier one level, somebody owns that battle space that we're going to go do something. We have to either ask them, right, request permission to do something in their battle space, or depending on if it's important enough, we can have somebody else tell them that we're going to go do something in their battle space. But you know, we have to be able to coordinate that, and it has to make sense, right? So if you're telling me you're going to put this all unilateral Air Force team in somebody else's battle space to be a comm node, as a prior deputy ops officer at a special operations at a theater special operations command, I'm going to ask you questions like, man, send me a battle roster. Who's there? How many guys? Who's in charge? Who's a medic? Who's a communicator? Who's a QRF? And that falls out pretty quick. Like, well, no, it's just this really small team of guys. It's like, okay, well, they don't have a medic. So like when you start putting guys on the ground domain, those questions, I mean, every formation needs a leader, a medic, and a communicator generally. Even at the smallest, most capable level on the theater side, when you look at the pilot teams or the Jeds, the Jedbergs, you know, they generally have a communicator. They have somebody who's medically trained, and one of the two of them's in charge, right? Like that's pretty critical to a formation on the ground. And I fear that on the theater side, on the Air Force side, they're kind of bypassing a lot of that. Same can be said for the pararescue side of, uh, man, the conventional CSAR, kind of general purpose force formation is great at what they do. But if you're going to put them on the ground, in the ground domain for an undetermined amount of time or even a planned amount of time, they got to be able to communicate. Which we were talking, giving
Hmm.
PJ's radio classes. They're talented dudes, like
Oh
they're
yeah.
great guys. But like, I don't know a mission where I just needed 18 medics, or a mission where I needed 18 combat controllers.
They're just trained for a different mission.
Yeah, they're trained for a different
Yeah.
mission. And it's again, I
They're
love.
capable of doing the mission we do if they were trained for that mission.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you'd have to attach some capability.
Yeah.
In special tactics side, we're lucky that with the formations we have, it's much more of a generalized formation, right? Like, I've never planned or executed a mission where I needed 12 JTACs, right? I could have 10 guys that are JTAC trained, but one's a primary, one's probably an alternate. Um, but beyond that, like at the end of the day, I need guys that can pull security and go put out lights and establish a casualty collection point and do all kind of stuff. Which that kind of walks you down a different road. But in the special tactics formation, at least we have the ability to say, hey, in this one, say I split the team, these 6 dudes, there's a leader, a communicator, a JTAC, a guy who can land airplanes, a medic, and a guy who can fly an SUAS, whether it's kinetic or for organic ISR. Like, that formation can live, eat, sleep, live together, and do something. And then if we don't need all that, we don't need all that. Or if it's an airfield seizure and they need a ranger company, let's go. All right. But I think that's kind of the healthiest way to do it. I think I'm trying to say it as correctly as I can. Some of the experimentation going on, which I believe, you know, SecDef Hexeth has paused smartly. It's just a bit ill-informed uh, of, like, well, hey, we can do this with this. It's like, no, and I hate the term. I've briefed it probably 100 times in my career. For a while there, everybody was hung up on unilateral, right? The term was unilateral. We got to do this unilateral. And I was like, hey guys, like, I don't know the last thing that was truly unilateral in special operations, right? Like, even and folks will be like, oh, Green Berets, ODA. It's like, awesome. Who was given them ISR? Oh, an Air Force plane. Okay. Uh, who was talking to that ISR? Oh, a combat controller. Okay. Like, a lot of times, hey, they have a Marine Corps dog handler. Sweet. Like, it it's really hard. It's you'd have to dig pretty deep to really define, like, well, this is completely unilateral thing, right? Because in special operations, it's not that. It's like, hey, we need everybody. We need the goodness that everybody provides to the formation to get the mission done that we were given. So I think chasing after something being unilateral, like, again, do I need to take 4 special tactics teams to set up Rhino in Afghanistan during the initial invasion? No, I need about 4 or 5 guys that have expertise in the air component, and then I need a bunch of Rangers to pull security. Like, and I don't care if it's unilateral. The job is to go establish a dirt landing strip in Afghanistan. That was
Mhm.
it.
I think that was one thing. I realized, like, once I got out and I was talking, like, this is when I was in school. People, young guys are always just like, which one's the best? Which one gets the best missions in this? I'm like, well, it's all joint.
Yeah,
Everyone has a specialty they're bringing,
yeah,
and everyone has a specialty they're trained in. Not one person does it all.
yeah.
So everyone's got their little piece they're bringing to the table to basically make that team
Sure.
work.
Yeah,
So I think a lot of people are kind of surprised by that. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, that's why it's like kind of like Joint Special Operations Command. They're all
yeah.
working
Yeah.
together.
You talked about Eagle Claw a bit. I heard on the Antihero podcast.
Yeah, I said it wrong. I said Iraq, but it was as Iran.
It
That
was
was like,
Iran. Yeah, yeah.
wasn't that was the start of what
What
JSON,
SP
yeah,
became?
what
Yeah.
SC and all
Well,
that
so
became.
that was, yeah. That
And correct me, I right about the one controller jumping in? If I remember, it was a major that did that.
you were close.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Coach Carney, who they call the
Okay.
Godfather of special tactics.
Yeah.
Um, he was one of the folks there. There were several guys that established that dirt landing strip. And then obviously the mayhem that ensued is what caused the investigation and then the development of Joint Special Operations Command. Um, but yeah, it was Coach Carney uh, was one of the folks.
Okay.
Um, he,
Is he still around?
he's still alive.
Still alive?
He's still alive.
Might
Yeah,
try to get him on the show or something. Here.
yeah, great
Yeah.
speaker. He's getting older. I could be off. I mean, I'm not the best social media guy, as you guys both know, but um, I know last time I heard anything about him, he was still doing pretty well. I'm
Awesome.
pretty certain still in this area too.
Oh, really?
I believe so.
I'm definitely gonna try to track him
Yeah,
down.
Coach John Carney.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so him, Wayne Norad, who's still around. I saw
Mhm.
him yesterday. Um, Wayne was, about as initial a plank holder as you can get, as what we know as a 724 nowadays.
Mhm.
He's still out and about. He'd be a great guy to talk to.
Yeah.
lots of stories.
You get him in
We might have to do a lot of beeps or edits. I don't know where this is getting pushed, but
no,
like man, if you want to talk about a wealth of information, you start talking about special tactics. Like
yeah,
Wayne Norad, Mike Ramos, who's still kicking, doing real well.
okay.
All those guys. Um, yeah, you know, a lot of those guys I've stolen a lot of knowledge and stuff from because
Yeah,
I'm just now 40, but
I'm about to track those guys down. Okay, so I know we kind of went a different direction there, which is great. You broke down a lot. You commissioned,
yep.
and then you didn't stay. Did you go right into the stove pipeline from commission, or did you stay like in the National Mission Force or SEER or?
So I was deployed. I put in my package 2011. I got selected to come to assessment here in Florida. I came in April of 12. So I came back from that deployment in probably March, March of 12.
Mhm.
Um,
I think that's when I kind of met you.
Probably, I think,
I remember meeting you in the computer room at STTS.
okay, that's
Yeah.
probably, so I think I do remember this actually, but it was funny. Sam Schindler again pops up in my
Mhm.
life, which is great. I knew that if I did not get picked up, here, let me back up. So I submit a package to go to STO selection while I'm deployed. The same career field manager that was not letting me retrain from Syria into combat control was still, he has to sign off on, hey, if this member is selected, I will allow them to leave the community. So he shoots me a note back, and I remember I'm sitting with one of my favorite SEAL buddies who was an '04 back then, now in '06, and I was like, read this. Like, is this guy serious? And he said, hey, I'm not going to sign this. I don't support you becoming a special tactics officer. However, since you're already in the SEER community, right, which is tied to the Guardian Angel PJ Crow community, I would support you becoming a combat rescue officer. And again, I already said, like, man, I was not interested in that life. So I'm like, man, how do I navigate this? Luckily, I got a letter of recommendation from then Colonel Wolf Davidson, now Major General Wolf Davidson, I believe, who was a STO, who was a commander of the 724 Special Tactics Group. So he was a commander of the national level for the Air Force side. He submitted a letter of recommendation for me, and still the career field manager, who's a SEER chief, like, don't care. Like, I think the note was something like, hey, all these guys, the reason all these guys are saying that they want you is the same reason I want you. It's like, okay, I appreciate that, but I don't, I'm not interested in doing this, right? Um, so this is probably where I first initiated some of my tradecraft training in the administrative world. I acknowledged the email back to the chief, and back then the Air Force specialty code for uh, Crow, I believe, was 13 Charlie, right, like the Air Force code, and for special tactics officer, I believe it was 13 Delta. So I changed the verbiage in that blurb, and it just said, if selected for a 13 series Air Force specialty code, I will release Tech Sergeant James Cleckler. And I sent it to him, and it came back signed. And I was like, okay. So I just said 13 series AFSC.
Yeah.
Uh, his name was Bonsant. I'll never forget, Chief Bonsant. Seemed like a nice guy. I hadn't interacted with him a whole lot, but it got signed, and I was like, okay, I got one shot at this. Like, if the cat comes out of the bag and I don't get picked up for STO, and he finds out I went to STO selection, I don't know what's going to come. Right? I'm still learning Air Force because I've been in the Joint Force so long. Anyway, I come down here, I go to selection, I get picked up. Well, as we're finishing up the selection events, um, Sam Schindler is actually, he goes, hey, can you stay down here for another week? They had like uh, what do they call it? Special tactics orientation course where they bring in folks to kind of let them see special tactics, mostly ROTC candidates and stuff. He goes, but the 2-3 STS, which is here at Hurlburt, is deployed. And I promised him that we could do some rappel stuff on the tower. He's like, are you still a current rappel master? I'm like, yeah, I just came back from deployment. Like, I'm current on everything. So I stayed here for a week after, still as a tech sergeant. I'm just now, I had to go buy new uniforms because I didn't have uniforms. So I'm like trying to remember what pocket my hat goes in my Air Force uniform. But so I ran some of the stuff. That's probably where I think we met. I was doing like ORMs for the Special Tactics orientation course because I stayed back and helped out. Probably Major Schindler, maybe Captain Schindler back then at that time. But yeah, so I did that, and then went back to North Carolina. Knew I was selected, um, but I had to go to officer training school, right? So which was fine. Back then I think it was 10 or 12 weeks. It was way too long for what you actually get taught out of it. But so I went back, packed up my Honda Accord back then, and drove to Montgomery, went to officer training school. Straight from officer training school, I drove to Herbert Field, and I was actually going to stay with Sam Schindler. That was the plan. Like, hey, the pipeline was going to be really weird because I was already I'd already done obviously the SEER courses. I wrote the curriculum for the orientation course, so initially I wasn't going to go because it didn't make sense. A lot of those guys had worked for me, Rob Parra, Hudson, some of those, Joe Piercy. I shouldn't say worked for him. We worked very closely together, but I was the instructor supervisor. Chris Hoover down there too. So risk was always high, but um, the pipeline wasn't really clean for me on what I was
Yeah.
going to do.
And you already airborne, free fall, and dive?
Had not been a dive.
And okay.
Yeah, airborne free fall, jump master, had all that stuff done. So it's like, hey, you need to get down here. We'll figure out what you need to do. Now knowing what I know, I don't care who you are. You should go through the entire pipeline because that's how you protect the formation from folks being able to cherry pick what they're going to do or not do. Um, but so I did. I went down to combat control orientation. It was not Colonel. It was Major Joe Gross back then. He's like, man, I don't care. You're going to orientation. I'm like, Roger that, sir. Because I didn't want to. You don't want to be that guy that didn't go,
Yeah.
right? Like there was a period of time when I was trying to commission that the DCG or deputy commander of the command was a SEAL, and he's like, hey man, like I don't care what the Air Force says. Like I want you to be a SEAL. Like I will make it work. And there was talks of like, hey, maybe you could skip SQT or this or that. Like we just want to get you back to the command in a SEAL uniform quick. And I was like, man, I don't know, like because not that I was thinking promotion then, but I was just thinking about like I wouldn't want to be that dude that didn't do something because some dude who's now retired said you were really good. Which is why I'm happy that I went through combat control orientation in San Antonio, which was a blast. I remember I had a horrible ear infection, but it didn't really matter. But again, I'd been in Afghanistan for months leading up, right? So like my water skills were not what they once were. So it was good. I mean, I think I got to meet some amazing young guys, which is kind of the theme of my whole pipeline. I had an amazing opportunity because, I went to combat control orientation or selection course down in San Antonio. I still obviously had to do air traffic control because I hadn't done that. But other guys, the guys I started with, I got to build strong relationships with them. Uh, but then they all went off to airborne school, I believe, airborne school or SEER. I'd already done those, so I skipped ahead to another team to do air traffic control with. So I got to know a whole new kind of cohort of dudes. Um, and then those guys went to go do certain things, and then I went to combat control school, um, where I met a whole other group of guys. Right, so where a lot of guys kind of pipeline team, right? It's their team that they kind of navigate that whole timeline with. I kind of got picked up out of one and dropped in another, and picked up out of one and dropped in another, which I loved, and I think the teams appreciated because most of the instructors throughout the courses I knew and had worked with previously. Uh, so I tried to be the best. In Air Force officer training school, they say be an umbrella, right, for your team. I always thought that was bogus because the critical thing of an umbrella is you're protecting yourself first. And then it's like, well, that's kind of a poor analogy because they say as your rank gets higher, your umbrella gets bigger. I'm like, well, that just means you're protecting yourself even better. Then maybe some people can kind of hide next to you. So I viewed it more like being a shield. Like, hey, I'll be the shield for the team. Like, it's probably about the same analogy, honestly, but it's like it's just better for the way that I think through things. Like, man, my job is to protect the formation, and I did. I mean, I think I had a lot of heart to hearts with instructors through the pipeline of like, hey, you guys might not be seeing it, but this dude's awesome. I'll take this dude any day. And they'd kind of lay off the guy. Or like, yeah, the dude's a physical stud, but he's garbage. And they'd go at that dude, right? It wasn't me like cherry picking the team, but again, I was already an OTC graduate, had been a master instructor in the Air Force. Like I had played the game a little bit. So I think my thoughts were at least valued a little bit. And it gave more importantly, it gave me an opportunity to really protect the guy, which is a job of an officer, right? My job, special tactics officer, is to take care of special tactics, right? If you look at most AFSCs in the Air Force, if it says pilot, you're not like a aviation officer. Your job is to fly. The job of a special tactics officer, albeit you might have all these cool badges, you only have those badges to take care of the guys, to be next to them while they're doing something. Like your job is to take care of the formation, right? I don't have this thing that says I'm awesome. It's like, no, I can jump out of planes or scuba dive or hike or sneak in or drive a car, but I just get there to take care of the guys, make sure the mission gets done while taking care of the guys. It's pretty basic, honestly, right? Whether it involves, jumping out of a crazy airplane at 30,000 feet in the middle of the night, you're doing that to take care of the mission and take care of the guys, which I loved. But I know I went off track.
No, it was good. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so jumped through the pipe, went through the pipeline relatively quick. Went to the 2-1 STS in North Carolina, which was perfect because I didn't have to
Mm.
move. So now I'm back at the theater side, right? This is a White Sox formation. I'm a second lieutenant. Um, the unit, that was 2014. I remember so it was November of 14. I graduate combat control school, and the then wing commander at the time comes down, and we're about to go on stage, right? I got my team sergeant doing blues inspections. I'm greeting families and thanking them for their amazing sons. Um, and the commander of the special tactics training squadron, Eli Mitchell at the time,
Mhm.
goes, "Hey, Lieutenant Cleckler, immediately after graduation, you need to come to my office." And so I'm like, okay. So the whole graduation, I'm like, man, what did a guy get in trouble? Did a guy beat somebody up at the PX, or what happened? I'm just thinking through. Of course, I don't think anything happened, or I should have known about it. But I go in, and the wing commander's in there, and I was like, okay, this is something. Like, they changed my orders. I'm now going to New Mexico or overseas or something. So, like, what's up? And they go, hey, no, you're still going to North Carolina. You're going to 21st STS. It was November 12th. I remember this. They go, but you're going to take some leave, and I was like, well, yeah, I haven't been home in about a year. Uh, they go, no, no, you are the commander of the 21st Special Tactics Squadron starting November 14th. Sign these orders, because the the majority of the unit had just surged to go fight ISIS, right, in Iraq. So Lieutenant Colonel Jason Self, then Major Matt Silos, right now Colonel Matt Silos was the ops officer at the time. They all surged. They all went to Iraq, as they should have, because that's the job of special tactics. So there was probably 53, I think, 53 folks that stayed home, primarily support folks. But there was some non-judicial punishment that was pending for some folks. A couple guys that got sent home from deployments for some things that, if I had been involved, I wouldn't have sent them home or given them paperwork for, because I would have done the same thing. And then there was some other stuff that needed to be, management of property, stuff like that. Anyway, so I go up there, and I'm the commander of the 21st. I'm second lieutenant Stowe. You know, luckily the senior enlisted leader stayed back, Charlie McCarney, who I'd known forever, spent a ton of time in North
Awesome.
Carolina. He was my chief, right? So it was me and Charlie, which was funny because I think he was a tech sergeant when I was a senior airman at one point. We did some skydiving together. So he advised me very well, as a very talented and smart senior enlisted leader would.
I was very impressed with him. He was my combat control school commandant.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah.
And again, like, it was funny. We joke about it, but then, hey, it's business. Like, I'm the commander, right? And the ASOC commander at the time, 3-star General Heithold, came up, and he thought it was hilarious. He's like, man, I've never seen a special tactics officer second lieutenant. I've definitely never seen one that's a squadron commander. And we're like this weird annex, we're on Pope, which is just because
Yeah.
part of Bragg, and I'm managing like contractual issues of who can do what. And that's where I learned that, like, as an Air Force tenant, you literally have to pay money to the Army for your power for your building, right? So I became like the funny old man that's like, turn the lights off in the team room. I gotta pay. Like, if you want Arc'teryx, shut the lights off. Um, so I learned a lot, man. It probably sped me up a whole lot, right? Because I
Yeah.
really got to see what it
I've
was as an O5 commander.
never heard a second lieutenant becoming a squadron commander.
Yeah, I mean, we
I
do it kind of weird ways, and other guys have done it, but probably not second lieutenants, because
yeah.
stows don't come out of the pipeline. They're normally captains by the time they get out of the pipeline, right? So I just, because I'd done everything as an enlisted guy, I snuck in fast,
And
which was great.
you didn't get the O5 pay for being a squadron commander
No,
either.
not at all. Zero. Still just a lieutenant. I actually lost pay for a while, going from being an E6 to National Mission Force with all the extra pays. And then, I get my first check as an O1, and I wasn't getting jump pay. I wasn't getting demo pay. I wasn't getting hazardous duty pay. I wasn't getting instructor pay. Uh, because I wasn't on status, right? I'm just a student at that point. And I'm like, oh, man, I thought officers got paid a whole lot more. Now there's, you get extra pays in North Carolina anyway, but I lost all that simultaneously. And I was like, oh, man. And these uniforms aren't cheap either. Because, as an officer, you have to buy your uniform. You don't get them. You don't get a stipend,
Oh,
essentially,
that's right.
anymore. So
Yeah.
it's like, I better start making some rank. But eventually all that came back. But yeah, I did some time at the 2-1. Man, I loved it. Right. I again, because I was a second lieutenant, I was a commander for about 4.5 months, maybe 4 months. Then the unit slowly started coming back from Iraq. So the commander came back. I became the ops officer, right? So like the 2IC of the unit. So now I got to see what the operations officer did, right? So I've most my whole troop that I'm about to go join is still deployed. So I've seen what the commander does. I've now seen what the ops officer does. And then the bulk of the unit gets back. So I go from being commander, ops officer to assistant troop commander, which was awesome, right? My troop commander was Captain George Kavulich, unbelievably talented, amazing guy.
Kavulich.
Yeah,
I went through selection with him.
yeah, the
Yeah.
robot, the cyborg.
Yeah. He was
It-
awesome. I
oh,
went through with him. Him and James Caldwell.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
Jimmy Caldwell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We went through selection together, and I think almost the entire pipeline. CC, I think we did CCS together too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. George or Jorge, as I call him,
Hmm.
unbelievably talented. We balance each other out, I think, really well, right? Because he was really smart, and I just done a lot of things, I think. So we worked together really well. Um, at first I think there was tone to him being concerned of like a mutinous environment because I think I could have swayed the team pretty quick if I became that guy. But I mean, he was a rock star. Like he taught me tons. There was a strong team at the 2-1 back then for troop commanders: Blake Jones, Rylan Tanner, George, and Matt Silos as a DO, and then Mike Bain as a DO after that, who I'd known forever. Long time 2-4, got prior controller, then Stowe. So we had a great. I mean, but so yeah, I was assistant troop commander for a period of time. Uh, Learned a lot. George went and assessed 724 and left. So I fleeted up to troop commander, red team. Loved it. I mean, amazing. The biggest a team got, I think, was 36 guys. So we essentially had 3 teams. In that team, we had SR guys, or back then SAUTs, now SR guys, um, TAC Ps, and combat controllers. This was before we had integrated PJs. So for the rotations, we would get augmentee PJs generally from the 2-3 STS. Um, but yeah, did 3 rotations to Africa then, and at first, again, a lot of my really good buddies were Army guys, and a couple of the key ones had left the National Mission Force and gone to Third Special Forces Group. So I had an unfair advantage on getting into certain training or getting access to certain ranges, or really just we ran essentially a whole train up cycle with 2 different ODAs. Um, yeah, from the First Battalion BCO third group. And I mean, there were certain planes of instruction that we ran, certain planes of instruction they ran, but I mean, we had guard helicopters flying us out to the East Coast to do water ops and for months at a time. I think because I had the trust, well, not because I had the trust, but because I had seen what the ops officer does and what the commander does, I was able to manage the budget pretty well to do like some high end. My goal was to bring as much of like the tier 1 level training to the team appropriately. There's something like, man, I don't need a theater soft special tactics team doing house runs for hostage rescue. Like we're not going to do that, guys. But I need you to be able to jump out of an airplane at night in the middle of nowhere and land together and move somewhere and do something, right? So we did some great workups out in Arizona. Um, but yeah, the team was amazing. That's a job that I would have. That's like the pinnacle of when I was like, okay, this is what all that administrivia and stuff I fought for. Like, I got 36 dudes that are all ready and they're hungry and they just are willing to learn and want to go. So yeah, I would have done that the rest of my career. If they'd let me stay at the 2-1 SDS as a troop commander, I would have done it. But
You did 3 rotations there.
yeah, 3 rotations, 2-1.
Same team every time, or
I mean, we would get young guys and
yeah,
lose old guys, but yeah, all red team.
it's awesome.
I actually built the con-op on why the teams should stay GCC or regionally organized, right? Because in the Air Force eyes, it's like, well, hey, Jimmy and his team already did Africa. Their next rotation should be Afghanistan, and then their next one should be Iraq, right? Should give them a breath of. And Randy Harvey was a commander back then, great guy, and I actually pitched him while still deployed. I've had all the troop commanders and him. I pitched him this concept of like, hey, we have the corporate knowledge for the organization and the folks that we're partnering with and the missions we've been tasked with. Why in an 18-month cycle are we going to flip flop it and make us learn a whole new thing? Like, um, and not to mention, the Northwest and East Africa missions back then were pretty new for the theater soft side. I was pretty experienced with it from my other time because I'd already been out there a few times. Um, I was like, hey, the equipment we have, like we've bought equipment and property to do this mission, so it's kind of fiscally unresponsible to then have another team buy the same equipment, like, and then have to get the training to do it and not know the network. So Going to Northwest Africa, it's like, hey, it's Third Special Forces Group. Like they're here. They're running this AO. We know them. We have the relationship. So when we rotate back out, we can fall in pretty cleanly, as opposed to it being a new set of guys who don't know the difference between Niger and Nigeria. Like we know the AO. We're not, ST isn't regionally organized like a Special Forces Group would be, but we can get pretty close, at least at the O5 unit level, of the teams being organized for these different, because the missions are a little bit different and the equipment's different, and some of the requirements are different. So
Once you cross as an O, is that you have to go back?
no, I'd have to go back. So that kind of ties to my thoughts on the kind of the combat controller SR to stow pipeline is, uh, if you're an enlisted guy at the National Mission Force and you commission, you go completely back through, because, and I support this wholeheartedly. Um, you're now being assessed as an officer, which is
Mm,
different.
yeah.
Which I think is a huge process improvement for, that we could model on the ST side of the house. Because someone might be a phenomenal tech sergeant or staff sergeant operator who happens to have a master's degree or bachelor's degree. That doesn't mean they're going to be a good officer, right? So they go through assessment, so they go through selection, as they should, to become a special tactics officer. But then I think they should go through the entirety of the pipeline. But now they're an officer, right? Because we've joked about it. That's where you should start learning the differences. They have to start kind of breaking out of you what you probably are going to be drawn to do as an experienced NCO, because that's an NCO's job, right? You now need to be focused on the officer's job, right? So, because I mean that can really uh, disaggregate a formation if you have an officer show up that is a really good team sergeant, because you have a really good team sergeant. Um, you need to now go do officer stuff.
Yeah.
In the pipeline is where you train, you learn all those things. So, uh, and that's, again, I've kind of stolen that or seen that at the national level. You might be a tier one operator at DevGuru, and then you commission, and they're like, great, now you're going to go through selection as an officer. You're probably going to spend some time at the theater platoons and then come back. Same with the Army. Um, but I mean, I totally, as much as I hated going through portions of the pipeline that I had already done or been heavily involved with, like, I would have never had the opportunity to meet all those different cohorts of guys uh, and learn, like, oh yeah, man, like I've got a team sergeant. The team sergeant is managing the formation. I am the translator for the team that protects the team, make sure we get the whatever the task is at hand. But I'm also interfacing with the headquarters or the leadership, on the status of the team, what we're working through, or any impediments to what they're asking us to do,
Yeah.
or ways to do things better, right? I mean, I know some young stows behind me in the pipeline. I've heard this probably 4 or 5 times. Um, they'd probably say saw the things that I was able to get away with, and then they tried to model it and they got crushed for it, which I don't think's right. But I had a long rope on, for example, at the selection course, it'd be, hey, we're going to do this. And I was like, well, I wrote your curriculum. We're not doing that, because that's not in the guidance. So if one of my guys breaks his leg doing this thing that we're not supposed to do, like, I've been on these safety and accident investigation boards. Do you really want to do that? And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And so the team's like, this is awesome. Like, this guy, like, we were supposed to do 3,000 burpees at lunch, and Lieutenant Cleckler just got us out of it. I'm like, well, I didn't get you out of it. It just shouldn't happen. But I mean, I say all that to say, like, the entirety of the special tactics pipeline was really well run. Like, we had injuries, you have guys get hurt, but again, like, hey, we're asking guys to do dangerous things, and there's nobody in the special tactics pipeline who doesn't want to be there, right? Which is, I wish we had the ability to do that across the formation. We don't, right? There's a lot of people in other formations that wanted to do something else and it didn't work out, and now they're doing that thing. There's nobody in special tactics who wanted to do something else, and they just kind of settled, and they're now a special reconnaissance guy or a combat controller or a stow, or a pararescueman or a TACP that might be in the formation, which is awesome, right? Like, my slogan was always like, hey, we're volunteers, not victims. Like, there's a lot of folks in the service who are there because they're, whatever it may or may not be, different circumstances. But even on the AFSOC, right, the Air Force Special Operations Command side, there's a bunch of aviators that are talented, patriotic Americans who probably came in to fly F-22s or F-35s and didn't do that well. So now they fly C-130s or CV-22s. Um, they they didn't go through an assessment and selection. They just at some point in their life, a PowerPoint popped up and said, "Hey, you're going to fly CV-22s," and those happen to be in soft. So now you're a special operator, and and that's where there's a lot of weird rub, at all kind of levels. And again, it's not we're better than you. It's just, hey, we're a small formation that's highly selective. Like, so we have the luxury of attracting talented, highly selected people, both on the officer and enlisted side. And you have to do some different things to retain that talent because any of our guys that look at you, like if you don't handle talent well, it's going to go somewhere else and still be talented. You're just going to miss out on you know what could they have done if you'd handled it better.
Yeah. I remember we talked about that. I never thought about it until you said that, like, because of the 160th, the special operations helicopters, those guys are assessed, selected, tons of experience. Like they choose to want to go do that
Yeah.
job.
Oh yeah. They're
And
volunteers.
and maybe get picked up, maybe not get picked up.
100%. Yeah.
And when you brought up about AFSOC pilots, and it's not trying to like put them down or nothing, but they're not selected to go do that job. They don't volunteer to go do that job specifically. Like you said, they probably want to go fly F-16s, F-22s, and then something happens or whatever it is, and they're like, "Hey, guess what? You're flying this aircraft."
Yeah.
And it's not saying that they don't want to do the job, and not that they don't do it well, but you're right that they weren't. There wasn't a selection process for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, great
Yeah,
people. I've mentored some, had a lot work for me, worked alongside a bunch of them. I'm not bashing them, but it's like it's just a different formation. When you ask somebody, "Hey, we got to get this done. We're staying up the next two periods of darkness to get this done." If I look at a ST guy, I know that dude can do that because
yeah,
we've done that several times. I've seen people fall off the rails. It's like, man, you've never dealt with sleep deprivation your whole career. Somebody told you when to go to bed, when you were allowed to wake up, when you were allowed to show to the unit. Again, I want as a passenger on your airplane, fully support that. I want you to make sure you got all the sleep and the right amount of Hilton's points and breakfast and all that because I'm a passenger on your airplane. But when it comes to the soft side of like, it's time to get work done.
yeah,
That it's just the rubber meets the road pretty quickly. And I'm a huge fan of developing high performing teams, right? With whatever assets I have available to do that. But you're working with completely different pieces. I mean, it's just again assessment and selection, kind of like you said, Brent had alluded to, right? Like, man, I used to joke when people get mad about the amount of money that our enlisted formation gets paid, or the uniforms that they get, or the missions that they get, or it's like, hey, man, selection's free. If you want a seat on that helicopter or those boots or that nice rifle, selection's right there. Like we're never full. Go ahead, go through it, and then we'll see what if it shakes out right for you on the other end. You'll get those boots and that watch and that helmet and that mission.
yeah,
And if you don't want to do that, keep doing what you're doing. But then stop complaining that that my enlisted guy's getting all this giant bonus. It's like, well, that bonus is to keep that dude here because it's a lot cheaper than building another one in 5 years.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I only brought that up about the AFSOC thing. Hopefully, they just to make them better. If they could change some things, and not saying that they're not good right now, but I think it would be people that would have hired like how to say this more of like like we go through selection, we know we earned our spot to be there. Kind of same thing. I think they have like more pride in
Oh
what
yeah,
they're doing,
yeah,
more of like a spirit to corpse.
yeah,
It's like, hey, I went through a hard selection because I wanted to be here. I
yeah,
wanted to be an AFSOC pilot. Not so much like you said, PowerPoint popped up at flight school and said, "This is your new assignment."
yeah, yeah,
It's like, no, I chose to be here to be a gunship pilot. I chose to be a CV-22 pilot.
yeah,
So I think that would actually be better for them if they
yeah.
did that.
I mean, I would love, when folks go through pilot training, if the number one person in the class was choosing an AC-130, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, or a MQ-9 in AFSOC, or CV-22, or C-146A, or whatever platform. You'd think that, like, man, the top of, but again, in the United States Air Force at pilot training, like the number one guy is probably picking a fifth gen fighter,
Yeah.
right? They're probably picking a helicopter, which I would, and then 160th, like the 160th is every time I've interacted with them has been amazing. And like you said, they're including the entirety of the formation is assessed and selected, right? Maintenance guy, whatever, like man,
Even
they're
the crew
sharp,
chief. Yeah.
like they're ready. They're a soft guy. whether you're flying a DAPS or a Little Bird or MH6, like those are soldiers. Those are special operations soldiers who happen to know how to fly something, and they employ that platform as a special operator would most of the time. Well, it could be a CH or it could be a 47. There's a reason they employ that thing differently than a conventional 47, right? They are trained, they assume a higher level of risk because they acknowledge they have to do that to get the risk done. The standard's higher because they're going to have harder missions. Um, but I feel like at their core, they're a special operator who just happens to fly something.
Mm.
On the ASOC side of the house, they're a lot of times they're an aviator that happens to be in special operations. There was no assessment selection, and and again, I'm not saying better, worse, tougher, stronger, smarter, more capable. It's just a different starting point. When I walk into an STS, I know, including the support folks, like they volunteered to be here. They get paid extra. Like when I was an ops officer, it's like, hey man, like we got to get the guys out the door in 12 hours, so we're gonna have to work through the night. That's why I pay you extra. You could be a parachute rigger. I don't care. We got to get the parachutes packed and inspected and rigged and equipment on the airplane, me included. Right? It's all hands. We got to get the guys out the door because something important is happening. And if you're not willing to do that, like I'll send you somewhere else where that expectation doesn't exist, but you're not going to get paid extra for it. So like the door's that way. Very rarely did that happen because the people felt like part of a high performing organization, and everybody has a role. They appreciated it because they were part of something, which is exactly what the kind of culture I wanted to be a part of and build and lead.
Yeah. No, I know there's gonna be some AFSOCOs that aren't gonna be happy about that conversation, but I mean, it is the truth, and I hope they just take it to heart, like what we're trying to say. It's not to put anybody down. It's like just to make it better, and make
Yes.
it better for everybody in the future generations going forward.
Yeah.
I think if they look at it that way, they're like, you know what, these guys have they're on something here. Like,
Oh yeah. I mean, in certain circles, it can't be argued. Like this isn't me subjectively or emotionally highlighting anything. Great people, right? Like my last position, I didn't have any ST guys that worked for me. I had uh, kind of a unique cohort across the ecosystem of AppSoc that worked for me. All great people, all talented in their thing, but they never got drowned to be there. And I'm not saying drowning is a marking, right?
yeah,
But you could really easily, if you want to keep the ethos of America's Air Commandos going, right? Which is an AFSOC thing. It's kind of like the Army has the Night Stalkers, right? That's a thing. But they volunteered, they went through assessment selection, they're now a Night Stalker. They could be a crew chief, they could be a maintenance guy, they could be a pilot. If AFSOC wants a similar moniker, and I worked on this with several of the AFSOC command chiefs for a period of time, you got to define it. Like, what is it? You and I talked about it. If I'm a dental technician at Minot, North Dakota, and I get orders to Hurlburt, and I show up to the special operations, what is it, dental squadron, medical group, right? First special operations medical group. I didn't just all of a sudden become an air commando. I'm not all of a sudden a special operator. I still do the same job day to day. So I'm not really tied, like emotionally, that moniker doesn't, I don't know what that is, right? Is it just the aviators? Is it ST? Is it both? Is it all of us? What is it, right? Which is a hard problem because, you know, the Air Force tries to not have like a have and have nots type culture, right? Which I understand that because it is an organization that does great work, but there are differences in different cohorts, right? Like I don't identify as a fighter pilot. I really didn't like the word airman because I'm not in the air. I mean, I'm a passenger a lot. I'm a passenger primarily on Army helicopters most of the time, but I get you don't want haves and have nots, but if you want to build a culture, in the easiest corollary is hey, the Army has Rangers, right? Not the Ranger Regiment, but they have the Ranger tab, right? Which is a pretty uh, highly sought after and recognizable uh, identifier. Like, hey, that person volunteered to do something really hard, spend a couple months doing all kind of stuff. I might have gone, I'm not a Ranger, but if I went through Ranger school 20 years ago and I see a guy with a Ranger tab, just like if I see a guy with a beret on, an ST beret, I know, hey, I can expect certain things of that guy. I know he can ruck. I know he can jump and dive. I know he can shoot and communicate. It's pretty smart because he either talks to airplanes a lot or does medicine at a high level or does reconnaissance well. So like pretty intelligent, obviously a volunteer most importantly. And there's certain things I can expect of that person, similar to the Ranger tab. But if AFSOC wanted an identifier, like then you have to put there needs to be a crucible effort, right? Put them through something that is acknowledged of like, again, I don't care what that person does as their daily activities, but hey, if that E3 volunteered to go and stay up for a couple nights straight and ruck and maybe shoot and program radios and wear MBGs, even though he's a dental tech, I can expect that of that dude. Should something happen, like he's a valuable part of the organization. Not to say that the others aren't, but I know that that guy raised his hand and volunteered, similar to the 160th. And that doesn't have to be a hard thing. Like we've talked about it. You can do some rucking, some sleep deprivation, some planning, maybe make them carry heavy stuff and make them be uncomfortable for a period of time. You can do all that safely on any installation. And then now maybe they've earned the moniker of an air commando. Um, but if you don't define it, it's just another thing.
It has no value.
Yeah, there's like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. I'm an air commando. Imagine if the 160th just started calling everybody. There was a period of time where everybody at a special forces group had a beret,
Yeah.
and it didn't work well. It didn't make sense. It's like, well, that doesn't like the Green Beret was presidentially provided as a distinction of honor or badge of honor. I'm misparaphrasing JFK, but
Mhm.
it was to identify somebody who had done something hard, right, and different. And then if you try to pull that back, so there's no haves and have nots, all of a sudden everybody's a soft guy. Like that's dangerous, honestly, and it's kind of a misrepresentation of the formation. And I jokingly, I told you I had dinner with Jeff Eichert, who's the combat control career field manager, and we talk about all kind of stuff because he's insanely capable and smart guy. Um, the fastest way to get A type players out of an organization is surround them with C type players, and if you don't have the fortitude to offboard those C type players, your A players are going to leave. Um, that's kind of stolen from several. Nick Saban said something very similar. Like, talent wants to be around talent to force them to stay talented. If you stick them in a less talented formation, they'll probably outperform for a while, but then they're probably going to move on to somewhere else that really tests their metal.
Mhm. I agree with that 100%. I always say when people ask me if I miss the military, I'm like, there's things I miss about it. Like I don't miss like the daily grind and all the nonsense, but like being around the high caliber individuals,
Oh yeah,
because everyone in that team room is just very highly capable, highly motivated. That's the big thing. It's highly motivated.
yeah,
There's no like, hey, I need you to go do like dudes are going to go find work.
oh yeah,
They're going to find work and put it in.
yeah,
And if they're not going to stay around.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean, folk. I got asked to do a panel the other day, and we were kind of great questions from the folks, but they were asking about, hey, if there was a single attribute that you want in an FT guy, and I always say trustability. Like, can I trust the guy? Young guys will say, physical ability. Can he deadlift 600 pounds? If not, I don't want him. And it's like, well, no, as a leader, I'd say trust, because trust networks its way through everything, right? If I got a guy and I have a guy who was this, who I love to death, and I'm going to his wedding in a couple months, but the dude was like a D1 cross country runner, so you can imagine what he was shaped like, right? So as a young guy, uh, people are like, oh man, but skinny legs, you got to be 200 to do something. Victim weight, which I called him that because I loved him. Um, but he was unbelievably trustworthy, right? So it's like, hey, you know, we got a short notice trip to take a team to Pakistan, right? We were the first soft team to go back into Pakistan since everybody got vacated after the UBL raid. And I was like, hey, he's going. Like, he is unbelievably trustworthy. So he can operate in an embassy environment. I'm not concerned about what he'll do. But also, like, if I told that guy, hey, we're going to go, we're going to northern Afghanistan, and we're going to be hiking weight up hills for 6 months. I trusted that he would get in the right shape to do that, right? He's never going to look like you, but the dude was trustworthy, right? So I think trust is the biggest thing. And I'm not saying that I don't trust other people across the formation that aren't ST, but like, I know that every dude in an STS, you know it. There were multiple times in his life where he had to trust that if I black out, the instructors are gonna pull me out of the pool, or my teammates will. Or if I land in the trees, the medics are gonna come take care of me appropriately. Or if I'm a heat cat, my teammates are gonna drag me on a Skedco. Like you start to develop that trust. And then when folks that aren't from that or that ecosystem, they're involved, you're like, okay, same team, but like I know these guys. You're kind of an unknown. Not saying I'm discrediting what you can and can't do, but you gotta earn it. Like we gotta. That's where I think kind of a larger selection would make it much easier. Just like when a 160th guy shows up, I trust him. Boom. You wouldn't be there if I couldn't trust you.
Mhm.
Um,
No, I would say like the biggest compliment I can get or receive is saying like I trust that person or someone says I trust him.
yeah.
Someone I forgot what it was on, but someone asked me to like, what do I want people to say about me like when I'm gone one day or something like that. And is it like he's a good dude or I love that guy?
225 for 50.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. Yeah.
I want people to be like, you know what? Like I trust that guy.
Yeah.
I trusted him. And that's the same thing. Like I can be like, "Oh, I love that person," or "I like this guy," but, like, man, if I say I trust you, like, that's, like, pretty much the biggest form of compliment I can give you because
Yeah.
I'm trusting you with my life, with everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
With my I'm trusting you to make better decisions for me than
Hmm.
me making for myself,
Yeah.
and I don't I very few people I will say I actually trust.
Yeah. That was always like my commander's guidance. Like we talked through kind of how I matriculated my way down. But when I finally took the troop, and some of this, I think for the young officers specifically, they show up to team time. And again, this is why I think being enlisted is critically important before becoming an officer. For if you're an officer right out of school, you probably have 2.5 years on the team. So like those 2.5 years, you just went through a 2.5 year pipeline for that. In your brain, this is your opportunity. And I've seen young troop commanders just run their team into the dirt. And it's like, hey man, like I jokingly, and I didn't make this up. I was told this by one of my best friends and mentors. Like uh, in the special operations community, officers are kind of tourists, right? Like you're not there. If you build a jort cycle or a train up cycle, you're probably going to get two rotations, right? As an officer on the tactical team side, which is across the board: Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force. You're probably going to get two rotations. But if you view those two rotations as like your opportunity to like, man, we're going to be on the road 300 days a year, including the deployment, but like we're getting all this training, like we're going to go hard because that's your shot. I would tell young officers like, hey man, there's NCOs on that team who have had four officers. They've had four of you come through, and they all thought the same thing. And like these dudes are falling apart physically, maybe as far as a relationship goes. Like you have to acknowledge like this might to you like this is a finite period of time, but for the boys, this is their life. Like they're doing this, and they might go to another unit, but they're back on the same cycle with another young officer who's like, "We're going." And I mean, there's young guys that love it, but you get that troop chief that's three divorces in and two DUIs in, and he's like, "Guys, like I got it." It's a balance. That's why that troop chief advises the troop commander, and it's critical. But a lot of young O's, a lot of young officers are like, "This is my shot. We're going." And you've probably felt it as a young guy. You're like, "Okay, new officer, got it." Like, uh, it's not a bad thing, right? It's a spark of electricity sometimes, and a lot of times, amazing ideas or different ways to doing things is good. But sometimes it's like, man, like you got to pump the brakes. Like the boys are they live here. You're passing through.
That is so well said. I've never heard it say that way, but I hope like new O's hear that,
I
or
hope so. Yeah,
maybe even senior O's. Maybe they change things. Maybe they say, hey, 2 years is not enough time.
yeah.
Maybe an O needs 4 years on time. Maybe 10 years.
There's a reason at the national mission force level, like those folks stay there.
Do
Right?
they?
Oh yeah, yeah. You
Yeah.
stay. I mean, key. Sergeant majors or master chiefs, they'll bounce around for leadership, really to give back to the theater formation. But the Air Force side of like, now we got to rotate everybody all the time. It's like, man, you always have that new guy who, I don't know how many reorganizations you probably went through.
I always thought it was silly though to give up to put like a stow through a 2.5 year pipeline, and then it'd be like you can only be in your team for 2 years. Like what a waste of money and
Yeah,
time. It's like because at that time you can think about it, this guy's probably 28 years old
yeah,
and he's already off team. And even all my captains, all my O's, they're like, man, I want to stay. I want to
yeah.
keep going. I'm not even 30 yet. And
They
it's
all
just
they all
like,
do. I was the
yeah,
problem is, and Jeff, I Chief Master Sergeant Jeff Eichert, I should say, um, man, we've disaggregated and we have continually, I think since 2012, we've just continued to grow organizations, right? And those organizations need chiefs and they need commanders, which is really created a vacuum to bypass the most foundational time for the NCOs and the officers, which is running the team. Like our job is to run teams, right? Like, how do you build an O5 squadron commander? Well, he should be an O4 commander. How do you build an O4 commander? He should be an O3 commander, right? Which is why the flying side has such a hard time because they're just kind of surrounded by their bros until they're O5s, and then they're squadron commander. But what's a squadron comprised of? A bunch of people just like them, primarily all pilots. You'll hear like, "Yeah, there's no rank here. We're all." It's like, no, no, there's a commander and there's an ops officer. So on the flying side, aviation side, they don't really have an opportunity to lead a, a different formation till they're like an '06,
Yeah.
right? And again, I've had friends, I've mentored some of those folks and talked with a lot of them. It's like the first time that they weren't just talking to different versions of themselves, whereas on the soft side, your first deployment, you're going to have attachments aren't from your team, albeit an intel guy or whatever it could be, a logistician. So I think ST does it right, right? Like, hey man, I'm building officers. Your first deployment, you're going to lead a team, right? Probably 10 dudes, 10 to 15. Your second deployment, you're probably going to lead two of those. Your third deployment, you're going to lead an expeditionary special tactics squadron. So several teams and all the support. That is a healthy way. There's a reason that, and I can nerd out all you want, span of control issues. Ideal span of control is between 4 and 7 of whatever it is, right? If you have less than 4 people that are directly reporting to you, you're probably going to micromanage them. If you have more than 7, you're probably not managing them well, right? Which is all the way down to like the Prussian military construct. Like, hey, I've got a battalion. What's the battalion have? Well, it has 4 companies. What's the company have? Well, it has 4 platoons. Well, what's platoon have? Oh, it has squads. Like, it's pretty easy to follow that model all the way up, but again, I think the Air Force is just like, no, we're just all bros here. There's 40 people in the squadron, but nobody's really in charge. But we can trust everybody because they all have college degrees and they fly airplanes.
Mhm. Now that I think about it, they don't send pilots to school for 2 years and then say you're only going to fly the plane for 2 years, and then you'll be
No.
like, they're going to get as much time at 10 plus years out of that.
Oh no, they'll
Fly.
continue to fly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
I
briefed
mean, I
them.
met O6s,
Yeah.
like the squadron commanders who still go out and fly the F-16s.
We had a wing commander in Okinawa that I didn't work for. He was at the conventional wing, but we interacted with him a lot because he owned the base. Uh, he was a 1 star. He was a general, right? So '07, he was qualified. His original airframe, I don't remember what it was, some jet, wasn't even there. So he got qualified on everything else that was there. So and this is like my first real, because I'd been into the STS before. I'd been at the 720th Special Tactics Group. I'd been at the 24 Special Operations Wing. So I made my way through the ST ecosystem and loved it. My first time out of that ecosystem, I did a year because my wife and I could both go to South Korea. So I did a year in the Theater Special Operations Command, Special Operations Command Korea, as a deputy ops officer, DJ3, right? They had never had, like, they were mind blown that there was an Air Force guy in the jock because they'd have Air Force guys and they'd like handle ISR and handle fires. Luckily, Colonel Phil Brown, who was the J3, uh, we knew each other from previously in North Carolina, Army guy, amazing officer and leader. When he saw me coming, he's like, "No, Jimmy Cleckler, why would he be coming to Korea? This doesn't make any sense." And I'm like, "Hey, good to hear from you. My wife's going to Osan. I'm coming to Camp Humphreys, which is where SOC Corps was. Happy to work. Just tell me where to be. I'm just happy to be there. I just had my neck fused and a bunch of surgeries, so I needed some time." And yeah, all the staff, right? We had 2 special forces companies out there, tons of SEAL platoons rotating through, special tactics teams rotating through, and it was the first time that the SEALs and the Green Berets were like, "Hey, who's this Air Force guy that kicked back my CONOP for this?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. Like, when's the last time you guys did a night free fall insert together with partners?" Like, that's just a question as a guy who assumes risk or manages risk, uh, which is good. Because I think it was great for everybody. Like, I loved it. Once the formation started to understand, like, hey, I'm in the Air Force, but like, if we're going to talk about diving or subtraining operations, like, I've done all that. And they're like, "Oh, okay, this is a different. You're not a pilot. I'm not a pilot." Um, but I loved the opportunity to do that. But when I left there, it was I really feel like as a leader, my first time external to special tactics. Right, I was still an ops officer for a special tactics squadron in Okinawa, Japan, but our leadership was all aviators. Right, I was out of the safety net of the 720th Special Tactics Group, right, which is led by special tactics guys, or the 24 Special Operations Wing, which is led by special tactics guys. I was now in the 353rd Special Operations Wing, which was led by primarily C-130 guys. Um, and it was just night and day different. It was, I'd have to explain stuff, and I was at that point I was a frock doe 4, right? So I was technically getting paid as a captain still, but I was an ops officer at the unit. And I'm briefing 06's stuff, and they've never done it. Their whole career they were flying a C-130 or CV-22, which is great. Again, when I'm your passenger, I want you to be really, really good at that. But when I'd have to go brief the wing commander, right? Because we want to fly UAVs on his airfield, which is, to a fighter pilot, it's the most dangerous thing on the planet is you're going to be flying UAVs. And I'm talking a Black Hornet, right? Which is the size of a pair of sunglasses. And I was like, hey, we're putting guys at risk in this exercise to go check for radiation on these par stands. I don't need to put a guy in mop gear and Seaburn gear at risk. These dudes are trained. They can fly this thing with the IR camera on it the size of my sunglasses outside. They can set the altitude no higher than 50 feet if you're worried about it running into your airplanes. Not that it would hurt it anyway. But I'm trying to brief this con op to the wing commander. I think I got on schedule 4 times, and all 4 times he was flying. And I was like, guys, like, I'm just trying to be helpful. Like, we have the ability to mitigate risk. And I'm not saying just ST guys should have this capability. Like, your cops should have the ability to go fly these little drones and go check stuff. Like, we're mitigating risk for the entirety of the formation. And I'm trying to get on your calendar to brief you this this concept of operations, and you're flying. Like, I need somebody who can sign off on this concept. And they're like, oh, it's got to be the wing commander. I'm like, where is he? Oh, he's flying today. I'm like, what's he flying? Why? Like, isn't there a captain here that should be flying, like, and getting some time on the airplane? Like, and it was kind of to your point of like, oh, but he's got to stay current. I'm like, why? That's like, that'd be like me as an ops officer, as a major, taking a parachute off a guy's back so I could stay current as a parachutist. Like, I would never do that. We obviously have plenty of parachutes, but if it's a finite resource, like, man, give it to the dudes. That 1-star ain't leading the horde into the next war. I hope not. So, like, let the dudes and gals who are going to be doing that get every rep they can. You know, now I'd go jump with the guys when I could and dive and stuff like that, but my job was mitigating risk for the entirety of the formation and conducting mission analysis for the next thing to inform their train up so they were prepared whenever the balloon went up, right? Uh, but yeah, I mean, it was just terrible. It was eye opening, right? And that was kind of where I started realizing, like, man, I don't know if maybe I should have commissioned into the Army or Navy about 10 years ago. I loved the ST formation, right? And if there was an opportunity to stay in it, I definitely would have. I mean, obviously, I had plenty of medical things that kind of led to me getting out of the service, but yeah, I mean, it's just a completely different animal. Great Americans. I'm not bashing anybody, like you said. I'm sure there'll be some AFSOC officers that are offended. That's fine.
It's the
I've,
truth,
I've
though.
had this talk plenty. Again,
Yeah.
I'm not being
Yeah.
emotional or subjective. Like, I'm just spitting facts, as my
Yeah.
daughter would say.
And talk about you being banged up. You definitely are banged up. Um, I didn't realize how many injuries you actually had. You want to talk about like you actually your neck is fused, right?
Yeah, neck's fused, left shoulder's rebuilt, left hand's had a couple surgeries, a couple hernias, but that's just part of the gig. Um, had some shrapnel in my right orbital, my torso. Um, yeah, I mean, we hit a pretty good size IED that first deployment in Iraq in
Mhm.
06, 05, 06. It was in 06 though. Um, that was a good one. Um, took a pretty good fall out of a helicopter on the stairs, luckily, or it would have been even further. That's what probably broke my neck, destroyed my shoulder. Like I told you, rifle broke in two, NVGs cut my face open when I hit the ground. Um, yeah, yeah, a couple.
What is it on your leg? Because you wear the brace.
Yeah, so my L4 and L5, I need another surgery pretty soon, probably next month. My my L4 is destroyed, so my spine is basically sitting on the bundle of nerves that would allow me to pick up my right foot. So uh, the prognosis is hopeful that once I get that surgery, uh, it's called drop foot, right? So I wear a brace to hold my foot up, or I walk around like a zombie. But I can still run in it. I can still ruck in it. It's just a little painful on the calf, but I still do it. Um, but yeah, so had I stayed, and I will give a shout out. As you know, I did a 6 week TBI and kind of full body rehab program at Eglin Air Force Base, which I would recommend to any operator. who's, if you're lobbing mortars or firing Carl G's or eating IEDs occasionally, or just getting hit in the head a lot, I would recommend it. I don't think I did it. I did it as best I could, but I wish I had done it at like 12 years in and not 21 or 22, right? Because I think that program is amazing, and there's several of them. It's called the Intrepid Spirit Center. There's several of them, I believe, all over the nation. They're tied in with the NICO formation, which is really close with the National Mission Force. But man, the that organization, like I did probably because you go there, like that's your place of duty for 6 weeks. Cohorts are really small. Um, I probably knocked out like 3 years worth of medical appointments and treatment in 6 weeks, just because you're there every day and unbelievably well organized staff. Like, hey, you're doing PT, you're doing physical training, then you're doing PT, then you're doing this nutrition, mental health, like go get an MRI, go do that. Like they run you hard. It is your place of duty, and it's not like we would joke you're out of there at noon or 1300. Like you're there till 5 every day, and you're there at 7 in the morning. But man, I can't say enough about that organization. Like, but I wish and I hope that young guys that hear this, like, man, go after your first IED or your first TBI or your first shoulder rebuild, because then we might extend your time in service 10 more years. I went on the back end of like, hey man, I spent a bunch of time at a data master organization and my medical records are hidden. So like I need to get my stuff documented, which isn't a inaccurate way to do it. You're being seen by great, very professional staff. But I was like, man, if I had done this like I don't know 2015, I might still be able to keep going. But yeah, my neck's fused, my shoulders rebuilt, my hands had multiple surgeries. I broke both my legs, uh, and double hernia surgery, and I still need a back surgery. But the back surgery, I purposefully and was advised to wait until after I'm out of the service, because the procedures available to an active duty service member are pretty much another fusion. So now that my neck's already fused, if I got my back fused, uh, I'd probably be even more useless. And I'm only 40. So the VA side of the house has some different opportunities where they think they can solve the problem without having to fuse my lower back. So
That's the price of being an operator. That's why you have the seat on the helicopter.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it
You
comes
know,
with bumps and bruises. Yeah.
everybody wants to be an operator until it's time to do operator stuff. But I mean, like, it's the reality of it. Like, you're gonna get banged up.
Oh yeah.
Like, you're gonna get hurt. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we do, and you can only, uh, you can only. Some things are just risky things, right? Like, and that sometimes there's accidents. Sometimes there's people that do stuff that they shouldn't have done, negligence. But sometimes things just happen, right? And the Air Force, they're big on operational risk management, and there's some really well done slide shows that give you numbers and letters, and somehow it's not risky at all anymore. And you're like, well, no, it's still like you're just moving risk around, which something I would never do as an officer or as a leader. Like I've never in my career abdicated my opportunity to make a risk decision. There's sometimes legally where I have to ask somebody else, but it just doesn't make sense to me. Like just because somebody's a 1 star, if they've never done the thing, how are they accurately assuming the risk for the thing? Which is really quick in the Air Force. Again, my time in Okinawa, it's like, hey, we're going to do an open ocean nighttime, unmarked, unknown, hey ho, into the water, because that is a mission essential task that we're out here to be able to do. Terribly dangerous. All right, like, hey, there's the maritime support vessel, or the MSV, had a catastrophic diabetic event of a civilian sailor, right, like a GS type employee. And it's like, yeah, we're getting on C-130s, we're pushing boats out, we're jumping out in the middle of the night, we're going to the boat, and then we're gonna go climb, get on the ship so that our PJs can treat this guy. We need to rehearse that. Like that's probably minus going to war in North Korea or against another adversary, probably the most logical, dangerous thing we're going to do. So I'm going to make the organization rehearse it over and over and over until we all are really good at it. But then I go brief that to, you know, a, a C-130 pilot because he's an '06. I have to tell him, and he's like, "You're going to do what? That sounds really dangerous." It's like, "Well, it is. That's why we're here. Like, it is dangerous, and no matter what you sign, it's still dangerous." Like, and my job as pretty much the senior most guy who actually understands the entirety of this mission is to manage the risk. Like, you can't mitigate; it doesn't disappear. Like, we're still putting a bunch of 22-year-old kids at night with parachutes on and fins duct taped to their legs into the water to go to a boat. We're going to hope the engine starts because it'll probably be flooded with salt water, right? As you've seen. And they're going to have to go make her do another boat, a friendly boat, but they still got to climb onto that thing, which is dangerous because now they have gear and they're climbing out of an inflatable boat onto a large vessel. Then they have to go treat a guy and then they're going to incorporate like it's just, there's a lot of stuff going on, which is what the guys want to do. And it's risky. It's much riskier than ensuring you got 12 hours of sleep, flying an airplane for 2 hours, landing right back where you took off from, and resetting. Like that's hard too. I don't want to. I've never done that. I'm not interested in doing that. But no matter what I sign or what paragraph I write you, at the end of the day, we're still doing that thing. Like we have to do that thing. Until you give me a robot that can do it, we're putting people's lives at risk. But
Yeah.
they signed up for that. They're all volunteers, right? That's what they came here to do, and they know that stuff happens.
Man, Randy, aren't you so glad we got Jimmy coming to SMU? I mean, like, seriously, the amount of experience and just the way you talk and you think, like the experience that you're going to bring to the team is just like it's incredible.
I would always, especially like teaching guys troop leading or mission planning, it's pretty easy to identify your known unknowns. Like, hey, we identified we really need to know how many people are in the room. I don't know. We don't know that. We got to figure it out. But then it's like, what about the unknown unknowns of like, hey man, chalk two didn't make, truck two didn't make it. Can you still continue with half the guys? Like, think through that contingency. How is that going to change what you're actually going to do? Now, depending on what it is, you could be cutting trees to create thoroughfares for other folks, or you could, be doing a hostage rescue. And it's trying to get rid of as many unknown unknowns as you can, and at least to identify them as a known unknown. Like, man, we don't know what our min force is. We don't know. If three chainsaws go down, can we continue, or how much is that going to slow us down, or whatever it is. Um, yeah, I think, and that I mean that just comes with all kind of random things that happen. You always train for contingency, but then there's always that one contingency that you're like, that's a new one. Didn't think about that one.
Mhm. Yeah, wow, no, it's incredible. I think I want to pivot over to now that you're transitioning out of the military. Unless
Yeah.
there's something more military you want to talk about.
No. No.
I
Hit it
mean, I think
home.
you covered quite a good amount there. I mean, so right now, you're doing the skill bridge with me, which for people that don't know, it's basically like I call it like a work release program. Your last 6 months in the military, you get to leave basically your duty station to go work at another company and develop a skill set, which you're doing real estate with me right now, which I'm happy you chose to do that with me because I mean you could have just went anywhere. You could have went and done anything, and I guess luckily when I sold you your house a couple years ago, it was a good enough experience to where you're like, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go with John. So I
I just
appreciate
saw how easy it was.
it.
No, I'm just kidding. But
Yeah. Oh, you made it easy for me, that's for sure. And then it's great because I went to your house since you remodeled the other day, and what you've done. This house is night and day difference. I mean, like it was a very dated house, and you've just turned it into like super modern, changed the whole layout of the home, and it's gorgeous. But you're actually still active duty till March, right?
yeah, 1 March. It's
2 more weeks active duty,
yeah.
and then you're fully out after 22 years of service. But now you're moved into the real estate world. You've already done well. You just sold some people a house, getting ready to do some other stuff. But I guess what is your plan, kind of going forward with that? And I'm the way you're so organized and structured. I'm assuming you're using that to help yourself in real estate. Now you're doing your planning for showings and stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, I am, and I joke because really, no, for the last probably to do the math. Yeah, for the last 6 years, I was blessed because of the position that I filled. Really from the, I was a wing executive officer in 2019, right? So yeah, so for 6 years, there we had an amazing front office. Being the XO, I was part of the front office, but amazing folks there. Um, and that was probably what tested me more than anything. I'll go get in a gunfight or ride on a helicopter or jump out of a plane any day. But like, you know, uh, understanding because we ran, I worked for now General Allen, who I've worked for several times in my career as Stowe. He viewed the XO or the executive officer position much more like, uh, somebody who can help lead the formation, like any other joint force does. Most time in the Air Force, the XO like manages a calendar. which I didn't do. We had a secretary for that. But there I was part of a very high performing front office, and then Korea the same, and then Okinawa the same, and then AFOC headquarters the same. So I had to relearn. They would joke with me because I didn't do a lot of prep. I had a fair amount of experiences with certain things, and I'm absolutely the first to admit what I don't know. I have no problem. Like, man, I don't know. I don't know. Um, but for that period of time, even at the AppSoc headquarters, they'd push me into meetings and be like, just talk about this. Roger that. I'll talk about it. Read the audience, use some tradecraft on what they're getting after. Um, but I've had to relearn a lot of that because I had these very talented secretaries and aides and front office folks that kind of help me my calendar management was never amazing. Um, but I've relearned it quickly. I was pretty locked in as a troop commander, like what I had to do, what I couldn't do, and same downrange is super easy. But I've relearned it. I'm pretty organized. Like I live on timelines just because my whole career since I was 17 has been that way. Probably before that. Um, but on the real estate side, I've enjoyed it, and I've always done construction. My dad did construction his whole life. I love it. I like the ability to probably ties into special operations too, but like get a task, put some hard work into it, and then like be able to look back and be like, I did that. It could be knocking down a wall or remodeling a house. You're like, I did that. It's done, complete. And a lot of the stuff we do, and I did in the service. You put tons of hours into something, and it's like we're not going to do that. You're like, okay, start over. Do more analysis. You're like, sweet. That was. I get it, and sometimes it's a drill, and sometimes it's necessary because the situation changed. But I think on real estate, the real estate side, and I didn't say it, but I appreciate you a ton for allowing me the skill bridge opportunity. But one, I get to learn something I didn't really know a whole lot before. I mean, I bought and sold homes during my time in the service. I didn't move as much as normal because I spent so much time in North Carolina. But I'd always remodel the house and make money off of it. Um, but when I started looking at what I wanted to do, I think the cool thing about real estate is, you have an opportunity. You get to choose who you interact with, right? Like, and we've talked about it of on the team you've built. Like, it's a high performing team of people that all kind of share a common goal, um, and have similar motivations, um, which is what I wanted. It's a high performing team, and being probably the most junior one of it, I think, right? It's an opportunity to learn from people who want to coach, teach, and mentor, which is what I love. I just kind of flip flopped, right? As opposed to being the old guy who had kind of done it all. I'm now the new guy who's like, man, like, how do I do this? And luckily, I have folks like you to guide me down that path. But what really drew me to it, I think, is you really get to choose who you work with. You can still be terribly impactful, right? Like I've got three prior teammates now, I think four, but three prior teammates that are all on their way here, and some of that trust, they're like, hey, I trust you, find me a house, and I appreciate that. It's like, man, I get to take the skills I had, like we joked about before, and I joked about with Crosby, I get to take the skills I had negotiating safe passage with the Taliban to negotiating with folks to get them a house that they can afford and that they love, and maybe they can invest with later. Um, but yeah, it's really all those things. High performing team, an opportunity to still be impactful and take care of people, and stay in the area. Because, like you said, my wife's active duty. She'll be here for the foreseeable future.
This is what I like about you, Jimmy. Most people just want to get in real estate just to sell real estate, but you've been a real estate investor your whole time.
Yeah.
Like you're looking to, like, flip houses. Even the house you're in right now, you're eventually going to flip that one, then go
Mhm.
to another one.
Yeah.
And that's what I always tell people to help me in real estate. It wasn't because of like how I marketed myself or how I was reaching out to people to sell real estate. I was showing people I was making my own money
Yep.
by doing my own investments. And that's what attracted people to come work with me, not my pretty face. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, exactly that. I enjoy it. Like, I do enjoy it. Getting licensed was a way to just the next step, the next logical step. And
I want to say this real quick actually. This is one thing I love about you. Before you even came to Skill Bridge, you were already in contact with me for at least I think a year,
yeah, probably
talking
since
about like,
since you got my house, since you
yeah, like,
bought.
hey, you were always like, hey, I want to come join you one day. I want to come join you. And then maybe it was 6 months or so prior to your actual start date in Skill Bridge. You're like, what can I be doing right now? That way I can just hit the ground running. And I was like, go get your license right now. Go get licensed right now in real estate. That way we don't have to worry about you doing it once you're already in.
Mhm.
I think you had it done in weeks, a month, or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a week. I
You're
did.
like, yeah, I tested out. I'm licensed. I was just like, what? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you just did it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, Marcus Mader, Chief Mader,
Hmm.
but he was my SEL. Similar timeline, kind of similar path. He was interested in real estate also, and I was like, hey, I talked to John, like, I'm just going to get my license now. It doesn't hurt, uh, and I can start learning. So yeah, I jumped on one of the, I Googled and found whatever had the best reviews for online course, 60 something hours, 62 hours, 64 hours, I think,
64 hours,
something
I'm
like that.
pretty sure.
I did them all, I promise. But I mean, I basically just got, and I don't sleep, right? That is a pro and a con. I sleep very little. My whole career has been that way. Um, yeah. So my wife was TDY on a work trip. So I just stayed up, and I got to where I think there's 5 or 6 chapters, maybe 7. I just got to where I could take, the randomly generated quiz and get 100 every time, minus the real estate math portion because it's not real math,
Yeah.
and I'm a math nerd, so I had a really hard time like pretending how math works. But beyond that, I was like, well, as long as I'm getting 100 on everything else, I'm just gonna go take the test as soon as I can. So um, yeah, I think I did that for 4 nights. And then the next, it was like a Friday. I drove to Pensacola, took the test, and it was funny. It was an old retired Navy guy that ran the testing center, and he's like, "Well, I'll probably see you again because most people don't pass this test on their first try." I'm like, "Well, okay." Like, you pay, you drive down, go down there, take the test, and I've been talking with Kevin all the birthday too, and I'm like, "Well, I studied. Like, I retain information. I promise you that. Like, I'm definitely not the smartest guy in any room, but like, I can retain stuff if it makes sense." So I took the test, walked out, and he was like, "Damn, well, I'll be like, you passed. Like, I'll give me your number because if I need a realtor, I'll hit you up." And, maybe that was my first referral. He never called me, but yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it. It's an opportunity, to really choose what clients I take on, take care of the ones that I choose to take on, and and still mentor people differently, but eventually through the investment side of advising like good properties, and now, I mean, kind of like you did with our formation has some really talented people, and it's like, man, it doesn't take much to help them become wildly successful
Mm.
because they're talented and motivated.
Yeah. I've always said this about you, Kevin, like the people that come join. I'm like, these guys will just be some of the best real estate agents out there, like some of the biggest, just because of their backgrounds. It's one thing I like to encourage people before they even get into real estate at an early age. Like young people come up to me, 17, 18 years old, and they're like, "Hey, I want to get into real estate right now." And I usually tell them like, I'm not saying don't do it, but it's good to have some other kind of life experiences
Yeah,
and other things to build. Because like I tell people, I would not have been a good real estate agent at age 20
sure.
or 25. I didn't have, well, one, I wasn't really interested in real estate, but I didn't really have enough life experience. Hadn't really done a lot. But when I got into real estate, like at age 30, I had a lot of life experience at that point, had a lot of new connections. So it was easier to start my real estate career. Plus, I was already doing my own real estate. And there was a trust factor with people on that.
Sure.
It's like, okay, he knows what he's doing. I know his reputation, I know who he is, been around the block enough to where there's a trust factor when it comes to real estate.
Oh yeah.
Whereas, like, if I'd have tried to do that at 18 years old, I don't think no one probably would have called me.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
we
I
joke.
haven't proven myself, no history.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we joke. I mean, there's a period of time I participated in some of the selections up at the National Mission Force level, and we were having a real, we have some really clear attributes of like what we're looking for certain people, especially for different tiers. Um, but the trainability, trustability, trainability are always way up there. But the one that we were having a really hard time defining, and me being a psychology nerd, I just started calling it toe, time on earth. Like, does this guy have enough toe? Like, because you might have a 20-year-old who's had an insane life experience. Hey,
Yeah.
dad sold oil, grew up in Saudi Arabia, then he lived in Indonesia. It's like, okay, this guy like mathematically doesn't have much time on earth, but like he's locked in. He's wide open, highly trainable, highly trustable. And then you get some guys that are 40, 35, maybe probably the oldest. But you're like, this guy's only done one thing since he was 17. Like like you're not gonna be able to get that out of him. He's not trainable because he's only gonna be able to do it the way that he's done it law of primacy. He can only do it the way he was trained to do it that first time. So he's not trainable. And that's where you get some guys like, well, but they're the best guy at this thing. And it's like, yeah, but I need more than that thing. And I think real estate allows you to be like, I would hope to be highly trainable. I'm like, hey man, I'm ready to learn. I'll go mow yards and put up signs and do open houses and represent at a golf tournament. I won't golf because I can't swing my body. I'll drive a cart and make drinks, but um, I think the trainability piece and time on earth, like you were saying, like having a wealth of experiences to reach into and at least use as some type of criteria to see what might happen.
It's also a good backstory because like a lot of the people I work with in real estate probably have a similar backstory, military, whatever it is, a
Yeah,
veteran connection, something. So once you already have that kind of like connection there, for instance, like I know lawyer real estate agents who are their client base, other attorneys.
sure.
There's a connection piece there. Um, like in real estate, you'll kind of notice like a lot of the people that you work with are, like I said, basically similar.
Hmm.
you know this guy has his audience, this guy has his audience, this guy has her audience. So like some people will look at someone like, I don't know how that guy's so good at real estate, and it's like, well, they appeal to a different audience.
Hmm.
There's very few people that can actually appeal to like every audience. But no, it is, I'm really happy seeing like where you're going with it and stuff, and like you already have a bunch of people lined up through connections, for real estate going
Sure.
forward. So it's gonna be nice to like see where you go forward, especially since I mean you're basically done with Skillbridge in like 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah, I'll be.
And I felt bad because like I think a few months, well, I was gone because of the
Uh,
North Carolina.
yeah. So that rehab program actually ate into about 2 or 3 weeks
Yeah,
of it, and then obviously the hurricane, which
yeah.
I'm okay with you going to do God's work. Uh, you linked me up with Katie, who's
Katie's a rock
impeccable.
star.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the mentorship I've gotten thus far, I think, I don't know if you know this. So I'm actually doing the SOCOM Wounded Warrior Fellowship, not the Air Force Skill Bridge
Oh, really?
program, but very similar in how they're lined out. But I have to do a monthly survey back to SOCOM to make sure they they're basically giving you like a review of if other people should be allowed, if your name pops up, right? And so monthly you have to do a survey, and the questions they ask, I'm always like, yeah, outstanding, outstanding, like because I'm sure there are some folks that sign up for a skill bridge or fellowship and they're brewing beer in their bathtub or something, but um, it's like, hey, reachability, mentorship, opportunity to actually practice what you said you were going to be doing. I'm like, yeah, every day, all day. It is nice that I can do it, remotely. But yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing experience.
Good.
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear
I've
that.
enjoyed it.
Really glad to hear that. Before we end, what's the next? Do you have goals in the future? Do you have like a 1 year goal, 2 year goal, 3 year goal?
1 year goal is to own at least one more property,
Yeah.
and take at least one trip. I think we have a couple trips lined up now. All my teammates are now retiring very quickly, so I don't know if I count those as trips, but my wife and I will do a trip to New York. Um, that was a goal that we lined up, but at least one more investment property, possibly selling our investment property in Oklahoma City, um, and then long term, uh, I would love to not have to work after 50. So that's 10 years from now. But I think so my 5 year goal would be to have uh, a comfortable amount of passive income from real estate, and still be here. That's part of the 5 year goal, is to still be in Florida.
It's comfortable. Just curious.
I mean, that's terribly comfortable in my eyes. Uh, my son's 18, about to go to school. My daughter's about to be 14. Um, I am lucky slash unlucky in the fact, due to injuries in combat, like, and they live in Texas, so you know they're good for college, which is great. I'm happy for that, to know that, and appreciative of some of the Texas legislation that allows that to be a thing. So they can go to school in Texas or Florida for free. So um, that makes me terribly comfortable, just that in itself. But I think if I have the ability to work on projects and work with people where it's rewarding, uh, and I feel like I'm doing good for somebody other than myself, I'd be comfortable with that. I wouldn't put a dollar amount on it. I mean, I'm a retired '04. My wife's an active duty '04, soon to be '05. So I don't need. I'd love to have a ton of money because I could help more people with it. Would be the goal. But my wife would joke, I don't have any hobbies. I've never had hobby. When I fought MMA, it's because I was a combatives instructor as a SEER guy. So it was just like more work. When
Oh, I
I
didn't know you did MMA fights.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, no
2
kidding.
years worth up in Washington State. Um, You know, I was a big skydiver, but that was because I was skydiving. So I shot a lot of camera and did some of that. But that's still work related.
We got to keep the podcast going. We got more stuff to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah. So I
What-
mean, I kind of never really had a whole lot of that. You know, I'm just ready to work. I like working, and I want it to be rewarding.
yeah. What's that? On that battery, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Good thing that you're actually tracking that. That's good. No, I want to come back and talk about the what real quick. What was the MMA record? How many fights did you do?
2 and 2,
2 and 2.
2 and 2. Yeah, Bart's Gym, Spokane, Washington,
Nice.
and they were. That's why we were joking about sanctioning and what's legal, what's
Yeah.
not. But they were absolutely not sanctioned. I mean, we had rally points like, hey, if the cops come, we're gonna meet here. Or there's a van, we're out of here. Like they were some. Yeah, yeah. So that's why I joke. And people are like, oh, you fought MMA? Did you? I was like, well, hold on, I did combatives in the military, but I boxed growing up and did plenty of fighting as one of the only gringos around. But yeah, I mean, it was a great time, great training, good team, good people.
Awesome.
Never a big BJJ guy, but had to learn a little, enough to get off the ground. Um, yeah,
Randy's a black belt
there you go.
in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah,
That's what he tells everybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you met Johnny Gunn at my retirement. Johnny Gunn's one of my lifelong friends. We went through the sewer pipeline together. He's now a world champion skydiver. He's the guy that we introduced first as my retirement guest.
Yeah.
Really made some of the senior APSOC leaders upset. But he's a two-time world champion skydiver.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of skydiving together. But he was a big-time wrestler from Michigan. And funny enough, again, I grew up in San Antonio. So when we met going through the SEER apprentice course, he said he was a wrestler. And Texas didn't have wrestling, at least where I was at. You had football and track. Uh, and when he said wrestler, I thought he did like WWE wrestling, like it was a character or something. I never knew that there was like wrestling competitively. So he trained at that same gym. But he was obviously amazing on the ground. But if he stood up, I'd bounce my knee off his forehead. Uh, but yeah, it was a good time.
No, that's awesome. All right, we're gonna wrap up here real quick, but one more last thing. Now that you've done all this experience and everything, I think this is good for like especially for the younger side of the audience. What would you, I guess, tell Jimmy, 18-year-old Jimmy again, what would you give a new guy advice that's looking to probably get into the special tactics world, whether enlisted or officers, someone that hasn't even joined,
Specific to the special tactics world,
or just maybe just the military?
yeah, I think more broadly because I've thought about this quite a bit. Don't don't search for a tab or a badge or a beret or a hat. You know, sit down and write out like what you think your ideal year or day looks like. Because I've mentored a fair amount of folks, and if you want to carry a gun and go run and get in gunfights, go to the Ranger Regiment. Like, that's what they do. Uh, if you want to be scuba qualified and free fall qualified and uh, work around boats a lot, you probably should go be a SEAL. If you want to do those same things but talk to airplanes a whole lot, you should probably come into special tactics. And if you're interested in living alongside and partnering and working by with and through foreign nations, like you should probably go be a Green Beret. But if you were to put all those things on a Venn diagram, there are similarities, right? Like you're at least going to be airborne qualified. You're going to carry a rifle and a gun and a helmet and drive around on trucks and do fun stuff. But then it kind of branches out pretty quickly on like, man, just try to figure out like what calls to you. Because I've talked to a lot of dudes that are like, I want to be a PJ. It's like, well, tell me why. I'm like, well, I want to be a medic in special operations. I want to be this and that. I'm like, well, you should go be a SEAL medic. Like that's what you explained to me is that, and be willing to do that. I always joke I'm probably by far not the best Air Force officer. I definitely have a different perspective because I grew up in the joint community, so you can hear things pretty quick, especially from a young guy. And it's like don't don't be so locked in on a specific MOS or AFSC or rate. Try to go to the community that provides you the most of what you think, one that you want, and where you can be of the most value. If you speak 3 languages already and you show up to ST and be like, why didn't you go be a Green Beret? Like, come on, that doesn't make any sense. Um, or across, if you really want to be jump dive and pre-fall qualified and be a JTAC, don't go be a Green Beret. Come into ST. I mean, I think, and again, not better, right, wrong, and different, but like nowadays, they're not like you and I. You can get on the internet, and you can find out everything about just about everything. So do your research, and then go to the organization that really speaks to you the most.
No, it's perfectly well said. Perfectly well said. Well, Jimmy, thanks for being my first guest that I haven't done a show since July of last year.
Yeah.
So this is exciting. There's a lot of new followers out there. I think they're really gonna like this, especially hearing your story. I mean, even for me, I loved hearing your story
Cool.
because there's a lot of things here I did not know, and it was really exciting for me. And with that, I think that is a wrap. You good with that, Randy? Good with that.
All
Thanks,
right.
brother.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, I wanted to thank everyone that supported John Howard Art last year. We did a little over $27,000 for charity. Every dollar from the proceeds go to charity, but I want to showcase some of the art for this commercial. We got really good prints, we got t-shirts, we got big coffee mugs, we got little coffee mugs, even got simple things as just like stickers. I stick these in my water bottle, cell phone cases. I know it may seem little, but every little thing goes to charity. Like I said, last year we did over $27,000 for charity. This is my way of showing you my happiness when I'm in nature, and I appreciate the support, and we'll keep it going. Thank you. So I had no intentions of starting another company, but after talking to mentors and agents I knew it was the right call because I wanted to get back to my roots of running a very small team. That way I could mentor and grow them and also providing that quality to our clients here as well. And I wanted to focus just on Destin 30A in Naples, Florida, whereas previously I was the broker for the entire state of Florida. And just like in special operations, we always say quality, not quantity. What agents and clients can expect from my brokerage is leadership. And I talk about this a lot, but everything comes down to leadership, whether it's in the military, whether it's in business. And I have done very well in the real estate world, especially when it comes to investment properties. And that is something that I want to pass down to my agents and to my clients. I want to show them how to do things the proper way, how to do the proper investments, and just help them grow. That way they can blaze their own path and also build their own wealth when it comes to real estate, whether you are an agent or you are a client of the brokerage. So the principles for me and for all my agents underneath me is courage, loyalty, and integrity. Courage to speak up and say something when things are not being done the correct way. The loyalty to our clients, and then our integrity to always speak up and say something. Even if no one's gonna find out, it's still to say, hey, this is not right, or I made that mistake, now here's how I'm gonna correct that. And that's what I expect out of anyone that comes to work for us. That's also what our clients can expect when they come to work with us as well.